talking there as I started. So we we lost our last recording because of technical issues.
This is your writing?
Yeah, that's
Your book.
that wonderful piece of cryptography you just saw there is my handwriting. You can. It's a beautiful thing of having terrible handwriting is there's no way to read what it is I'm trying to say. The CIA is after me. They're like, we gotta get this guy to just handwrite notes so that when they're intercepted, the Russians.
Be careful. I used to work for NSA.
Oh, did you?
I worked for the Army. I was in the Army Security Agency. I was trained as an order of battle specialist, essentially doing what NSA currently does: surreptitious data gathering.
Metadata gathering.
Through electronic means. In
Okay.
those days, the technology was not as sophisticated as what we have now. But
Okay.
I did it in French and Spanish.
Okay. So signals intelligence is what they call that, right?
No,
No.
it's spying,
Oh, spying.
electronic eavesdropping.
Oh. So you did that. You worked for the NSA as an electronic spy.
Monitoring messages in French and Spanish.
I didn't know that about you. I knew you had a military past. You've done a lot of really interesting things. You're quite a gem. I'm interested in how Florence, South Carolina, was so blessed with with the people around us.
Don't flatter me.
I'm just being as realistic as I can be, but I think that's
Everybody has their strong points and their weak points. And
true.
I don't go around having all the mistakes that I've made. I mean,
Yeah. I think being aware of people's shortcomings is one thing that I try to remind myself of is the latent greatness in people. So I do have this theory that, or I guess it's not even a theory, it's sort of a vision. If you take water and you cool it below the freezing point, where it actually begins to freeze, where physical like ice crystals form,
right.
is those nucleation sites are very more or less random. And while any individual particle can be a nucleation site for ice crystals,
Right.
necessarily most of them, the vast majority of them, cannot be. So in that system of water below the freezing point, there's the latent ability to crystallize a rapid phase transformation for the whole system. And I believe it's the same with people. I believe in the latent greatness of common men. Given the right circumstances and having the right, in the right conditions, I think that anyone can crystallize or precipitate out greatness. And in fact, most cases of great people, those aren't necessarily out of the realm of average people.
Very good.
What's special about them is the role that they're in. Let's pick on Elon Musk. So people like to abstract the people who are these nucleation sites, if you will. People like to postulate that they're like somehow head and shoulders above us, they're demigods walking among us, but really there's nothing especially great about them. It's just a happenstance. There's so many roles that we have within our society where those roles have to be filled. So my shtick is that there are probably thousands of people, viable Elon Musks out there. I mean, if you spend time around young people, you'll find that young people in particular are enormously bright and seek out stimulation. They haven't learned to compromise that. They have yet to crystallize, if you will, into society. And it becomes abundantly clear that it's not a fault of people that we have the problems that we do, or if you dream about one particular thing or any particular things, it's not the fault of people. It's mostly the fault of. It's not even like it's not like capitalism versus communism or anything. It's just these simple laws of logic that, just like crystallization, follows a logical pattern rather than some like innate fundamental force of the universe. It's just that's how crystallization has to occur. The same thing happens socially, and it seems to me that we're very capable of greatness, I guess, or of change, or whatever you'd like. But the limiting factor there is just those simple rules of hierarchy, if you will. I don't think that's escapable, right? I think that social hierarchy is, I wouldn't say physical, but I think it's a logical fact, a logical reality that recurs regardless of our efforts to make it otherwise. I think it's sort of a thing that just happens. I'm rambling.
That's okay.
Okay.
Let's look at some of the stuff that you've said.
Okay.
That I think is quite profound. I think you're absolutely right about innate curiosity. Children have it. Children have it in abundance. Adults seem to become, looking for a word, it gets acculturated out of them for various reasons. Social, job, religious, obligations, mores, society in general,
right.
Family pressure.
They fall into a particular role.
So that innate curiosity gets lost in most adults. But it's there. The ability is definitely there. A few people retain that. Tesla and others.
Okay.
And I don't know why.
So I keep thinking of the ice crystal analogy here because it seems to fit super well. At the actual nucleation site of an ice crystal, theoretically, there's a few supercritical particles that aren't actually crystallized.
Yeah. Those
Teslas and Elon Musk or something, they're still in that innately curious supercritical state.
Right.
Children or younger people who haven't yet crystallized or fallen into a role have that innate curiosity.
Right.
But the problem that children have is that they have to basically, or the problem that, I guess so, the problem that children have is that they're basically on the surface area of these crystals. They have to basically they're in a position where they have to pick where they fall in. If you look at our education system, that's kind of abundant. It seems like we're training for that, but really any education system will tend towards training people to fall into a role along the surface area. Yeah, that the society has available to it, right? So if wherever the opportunity is in your area, that's what you're going to train children for. Is like pick where you fall in. Some societies also do, like, I shouldn't say societies. Sometimes social conditions are such that there's more opportunities for nucleation sites, and there's more of a prevalence for that supercritical state that people have. So I'll give you an example. In a survival situation, the ability to fall in a particular role or a comfortable role is threatened. So systemically survival situation. So if you imagine some natural catastrophe, the idea that this person's a CEO doesn't matter that much, or this person was a cashier. Right. People fall into a supercritical state. We're more apt to recrystallize. So if we need, some organization here and there where these people maybe allocate food or something like that, or allocate for people's needs, we're more able to do that. So in those states, I would consider society to have the supercritical quality about it, where it's put under a tremendous amount of pressure by survival to do so. It's also like that in a frontier. So in a frontier, there hasn't been the opportunity for societies to extract or to exploit their resources. So crystals of any kind actually do have to sequester resources from their surroundings and then spread and grow. They're fascinating things. Societies do the same thing. They they have to take in resources from their surroundings, and they have to have people fall into roles, and then those roles provide more surface area for more people to fall into the society, or for the society to continue to grow. That's why every society is growth oriented. Like, I would say, probably not actually. Probably not every society is growth oriented. Some seem to be stable without growth. Maybe the analogy has gone too far at this point.
There's a tremendous amount of social pressure in all societies to conform to social norms.
Mm-hmm.
Some societies have or allow more leeway in violating those norms than others. For example, we read about the Puritans, that they left England because of their religious beliefs, and they wanted to be able to practice their religious beliefs unimpeded or unhindered by the majority of other Christians in England. They first went to Holland, and then they were given a grant to come to the United States, to America. There was no United States.
Not then,
To
yeah.
come to what became the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Okay.
They got here and they formed the most dictatorial, conformist society imaginable. Read the writings of Cotton Mather, for example.
I think I'm familiar with one case.
Or Nathaniel Hawthorne.
I think I'm familiar with one case. It might have been from Baltimore, where a man was put in the stocks for coming home and kissing his wife publicly. They put people to death for that kind of stuff.
And some, like Roger Sherman, I think it was Roger Sherman, left the Massachusetts Bay Colony and went to what's now Rhode Island and founded another colony because it was just too strict for him. So we have a tendency to enforce social conformity.
Mm-hmm.
That is very stifling for the type of creativity that you are talking about. It doesn't get a chance to crystallize.
Okay.
There are individuals who do not conform for whatever reason. They just will not. It cannot be beaten out of them. It cannot be socialized out of them. It cannot be taken away from them. These are the scientists. These are the creators. These are the inventors. These are the artists and the poets. These are the people who've made lasting contributions to society, sometimes at the price of their lives. Because not everybody who's a nonconformist
succeeds.
is insane.
Oh, that's true. Bruno comes to mind. Giovanni Bruno,
yes, I know.
completely right about just nailed it. Just based off of intuition, he could have been wrong, but he's
Look at how he ended up.
crispy. So why do we keep doing that? Why do we? If it seems to be that innovators in general are resistant to crystallizing, social conformity. If they're resistant to that, and they come bringing great gifts of technology and knowledge and science, why is it that it seems to be such a dominant strategy to enforce social cohesion? Why do we keep seeing that?
Social cohesion is the means by which a society, a tribe, survives.
Okay.
Trusted strategies for dealing with the environment, for dealing with a whole myriad of things that we are faced with, work, or they work well enough so that conformity is enforced.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. So that seems to make sense. So the only
yet societies become dysfunctional.
over time, yeah.
Over time, as the environment changes, as the conditions change, and they lose the ability to adapt, to take in and change according to new circumstances, they die.
Right. Regardless of social cohesion.
Regardless of social cohesion, and
probably because of it, right? So the circumstances change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The circumstances change. If you don't, you're dead.
Circumstances change, and then the social cohesion says, no, this is the way we've always done it, and right off a cliff we go.
And I see that in friends of mine.
Right.
I have a lot of immigrant friends who are still carrying with them social norms from the society that they left that do not work in the United States, in America, contemporary American society.
One recent case of immigration and then carrying norms with them is the massive immigration from California to Texas. And now Texas is thoroughly purple and probably will go blue in the next 4 years. And it's like people left California because of the results of these, because while California was enormously prosperous, circumstances change, and you can't inevitably, particularly with progressivism, like progressivism demands change as a norm. So progressive ideology does, yeah. So
Listening.
I would say so. So there may be natural limits to how far you can take that within given sets of circumstances, right? I'm not trying to critique, the policy
You're
of,
absolutely right.
right.
I agree, I should say.
But yeah, I'm not here to like specifically critique policy in California that's on the other side of the country. But you see these people who have been made miserable by more or less the results of progressivism, running up against its natural limits, right? You can't continually have, let's say, the government manage everything, or the ideals that progressivism provides no longer match up with the appropriate strategy for survival there.
Mm-hmm.
So people naturally leave, but they bring with them progressivism, or at least this idea of leftist progressivism. And it's like you left California for that reason, but you're coming to Texas, which is very different. Like the social parameters in Texas are very like laissez-faire as far as business goes. As far as zoning rights go, they don't have zoning rights. Like Houston does not have zoning regulations. You can have a church right next to a strip club, next to Fortune 500 headquarters. That is very Texas, and that's very not Californian. Also, Texas just geographically is distinct from California. Texas is very, very large. It's more spread out than California. And this goes into conservatism versus what we call liberalism. But I had a discussion. I don't think it was with you, about what defines conservatism versus liberalism. And
we talked about this in the restaurant. There was you, your mother,
Henry.
I, and can't remember the other person. It wasn't the other Susan, wasn't your mother's friend. She had moved away. But there was another person there. Can't remember.
Henry Sloan and Sarah. Was it Sarah? She was a former technician at a nuclear plant.
Sarah sounds very familiar.
She now makes...
I was sitting next to her. I was facing you and your mother. So I wasn't focused over here, and she didn't take part that much in the conversation.
The one time that I remember had Dr. Henry, the botanist. It had Sarah, and Sarah's... I remember she had done some stuff with like the Indo-European languages.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that was the conversation. What did we come up with in that conversation about?
We were talking, I had shown you my personal creed, and you looked at political beliefs, and you said, oh.
I thought it was very conservative.
Conservative, you are...
Well, you're very independent. Every person, in essence, is an independent. I believe. I don't think I've ever met somebody, at least anybody interesting, who's like down the line. It's exactly party lines.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I saw you as mostly a conservative in your personal creed, because you believed in respecting the rights of others above all.
Now,
yeah.
I wrote that, and I took those ideas from other sources.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had trouble coming up with them off the top of my head. It's very difficult to put down what you believe. As I found things, I wrote them down.
Mm-hmm.
The political views coincided with the 1940s encyclopedia article on conservatism.
Oh.
I showed conservatism has changed.
Yes, it
The
has.
whole definition, the whole philosophy has changed. I showed that to people who I used to work with at Charleston, and they said, "You're liberal."
Actually, sir. That's interesting. So you compiled a personal creed, you defined your belief by...
It's actually what I believe.
Right.
But I had to be prompted.
Right. And that's interesting. I think the definition of belief, or a good definition of belief, is just an idea that you love. So when you fall in love with an idea, you dawn it with, I believe this. There's plenty of ideas that we have that we know very well that we don't love, and we don't believe those things. So that's one of the difficult things about being highly empathetic. People who are extreme empaths often have crises of identity because they can't help but fall in love with things that they understand. So that they understand something, they might come across something really nasty and empathize with it very well because that's their nature. And then they don't know how to define themselves because they have love for things that conflict. But the more practical definition of conservatism versus liberalism that I've found is that conservatism is simply rural ideology, and liberalism is urban ideology, in a practical sense.
Edmund Burke,
Okay.
the founder of modern conservatism, the English parliamentarian, he was educated. He was totally opposed to the French philosophers.
Okay.
He was not rural. His thinking was not rural. And that's what I assume you mean, a mindset. Not necessarily where you live, but
well, in the purest definitional philosophical way, academically, you're absolutely correct. There's nuance there in the history of what defined the conservative movements. But what I mean by like the practical sense is, and admittedly, this is probably very short-sighted and specific to the United States' case, and specific to maybe just right now or the last few decades.
yeah.
I find that the modes of living in an urban setting is unsurprisingly very different from the modes of living in a rural setting. And that produces different ideologies or social conformities, right? And those differences, those ideological differences, are more or less what define our political ideologies that we experience today. That's what I find. I do believe that. Now, there's also there's consequences to that. One thing is we live in a world of increasingly penetrating technology and media. It's within the next probably within the next 5 years, it's probably going to go into our brain physiology. That's probably its end goal, is like literally jacked into your brain. Like Elon Musk is working on this stuff. Well, not him, but he's hired scientists to work on it. But one of the issues with that, in a society like the United States, it's very well in our interest to stay united. It shouldn't be the divided states of America. One of the issues with that, like let's take media for example. There are no conservative media outlets. There are media outlets that pander to conservative audiences, but they are not conservative media outlets because they're...
I don't know what you mean by that. There's Sinclair Broadcasting, which is a huge conglomerate, which tends to have what would be called a conservative editorial point of view. Let's put it that way.
Maybe I would have to agree that there are specific cases where there are...
I would put the New York Times and the Washington Post as more progressive or liberal media outlets.
See, my perspective is that Fox News is a liberal media outlet that panders to conservative audiences. There may be some conservatives that work at Fox, but it is not conservative. The reason why is because all of these media corporations, by factor of just necessity, they're going to be headquartered and hired inside of urban settings rather than rural settings. So by that virtue, there's a fundamental disconnect between the nuances and tendencies of the Fox News network and the audience that it panders to, which is the rural audience. It's just this is an abstract thing, but we can paint them however we'd like to. This is just how I would do it, right? You can define it in different ways and be no less wrong, but
interesting perspective. I hadn't thought
right.
about it that way.
The other thing is that representation and power. So rural peoples live more diffusely from one another, and that is probably why they have extreme cases of personal sovereignty, if you will. And in urban settings, people live very densely together. So collective sovereignty is more important in those cases, or more ideologically important in those circumstances.
I don't know that I buy that.
Okay.
The rural areas that I'm familiar with, including my hometown in New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
everybody knew each other. People helped each other out. People,
Yes.
everybody was related to one another.
Of course.
Having lived in big cities, even where I live now, here in Florence,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the people who live across the hall from me or next door to me.
Yeah.
And
It does happen in urban settings, but maybe the collective identity or the collective will is different. In urban settings,
that's an excellent point.
yeah.
Excellent point.
In the urban settings, the collective, the city,
Yes.
the abstract of the collective, and its relation to the individual is more strong than it is in a rural setting.
Right.
And in a rural setting, the individual's relationship to one another. I know my family and my people. I know you don't say my people, you just say like, oh, Jerry, right?
Right.
So it does seem to be more driven by individual interactions rather than individual actions with a collective,
Yes.
with an abstract collective.
Okay.
And look, this isn't because there's like, the Rockefellers pulling at strings, making sure that people in cities are brainwashed. Some people like to think conspiratorially like that, but it's not. It's just a factor of scaling. It's like the difference in policing, right? It shouldn't be surprising to us that city cops offer a very different experience from rural cops or smaller town cops,
Mm-hmm.
because like this was a topic that came up during the BLM riots about how unjust police officers are, or perceivably unjust police officers are. Most Americans, more than half of us, live in cities with over 1 million people in that city. So consider that you and I will probably we have a lifespan of about 33,000 days. So in a city of 1 million, there are 33 cases of the worst day in that person's life that occur.
Okay.
33 cases happened yesterday. 33 cases will happen tomorrow of the worst day. And those usually involve first responders. Just think of how bad your life has been and think, well, there's a possibility it could get worse.
Right.
And it'll probably involve first responders. The scope of scale changes. Like you're talking to city cops and saying like, you're going to spend your career dealing with the worst cases you possibly can. Fringe cases, absolutely outlier cases. And as things scale, of course you're going to have cases where some crazy Florida man with a katana, was at a school bus while naked and on meth. And yeah, you're going to have this as a factor of scale. And that's going to change the relationship between that community and its policing by necessity. So I don't see that like, I see a disconnect where the grievances in urban areas about unjust policing don't match up well with the urban or more conservative areas and their relationship to policing. Mm-hmm. Like, when there's the BLM riots that start out in Minnesota, they're saying, hey, look, this is absolutely unjust and this is not called for. But that doesn't pass the gut check in conservative America because our relationship to policing by necessity of scale
Right.
is fundamentally different.
Right.
So I just see that there's these two Americas, and it's not because of like conspiracy or conscientious design. It's just there's two different landscapes that people have to live in, and it's getting increasingly difficult to reconcile the necessities for those two things, even North and South. Like the South greatly enjoys the rhetoric of Donald Trump. The North does not. Probably one of the primary reasons why Donald Trump got ousted, which I don't believe we had. We did have an election, but I believe it was more of a power struggle than an election. Like we changed the rules prior to having the election, so I think it's more.
How did we change the rules?
We allowed for mail-in voting on the pretense of.
We've always had mail-in voting.
We have. That's the legal precedence for that. And I'm not challenging the results of the election at all.
Right.
I'm just, I'm also giving the caveat that
more people voted in this election
right than
than
ever.
Ever.
Right, and that goes back to I don't know if it was on this recording, but I had mentioned the largest demographic is please leave me alone. I don't care to vote. And this year, politics invaded everyone's life, and it destroyed that representation of apathy. Now, apathy towards politics, apathy towards power is a virtue. If you say, I do not care to, by proxy, enforce my way of life on other people,
Yes.
that's a virtue. I would say if you're the person who doesn't vote, that's morally you have the high ground above the two of us who are the other two political ideologies that are battling constantly. And by the way, constantly wrestling for territory over the other one. So if you don't vote, you're giving a vote to the other guy. Or if you vote libertarian, I vote libertarian because I know George Jorgensen. She's a great person. I should really introduce you to her.
That's the word you threw at me when we met in the...
Libertarian, yeah.
I was libertarian. I went and thought about it. Disappointing.
Libertarianism has become redefined as a brand of conservatism because the Overton window hasn't shifted to the left or the right. It's flattened out and moved, right? So I just...
Things have changed. We tend to look at the present and think, oh, it's always been this way, when it has not.
Normalcy bias.
Normalcy bias, right. And I'm a little bit older than you. I remember growing up in the 40s and 50s. I remember what politics were like. And things have changed in this country. It wasn't always like this. This is fairly recent in my lifetime. And I think I told you, I've voted consistently for the person who I thought was the best candidate, regardless of party.
Right, that's the right thing to do.
And even this time, I voted both Republican and Democrat in the most recent election.
I wanted to ask about, since you've seen politics, and I would assume you're very well aware of ideological landscape and topology as it shifts, more so than the average individual. How has it exactly shifted since the 40s and 50s? And what do you think drives that? I know, that's a big question. I ask really annoying questions.
I don't honestly know what's
Okay.
driving it. I see it, I don't like it.
I have...
Because I have never seen the animosity.
I have a theory.
Okay.
Oh, no, I want to hear... Well, okay. Here's my theory about what drives the divide. This is going to be long. So it actually... We have a fundamental flaw with the way our species is evolved and designed. One way that we survive as a species is we observe others, we assess their state, and we decide whether we emulate what they do or not. If this guy over here is getting a bunch of fish and he's fishing like that, and I want the fish, I do that. If this guy was poking in this hole with a stick and he got eaten by a bear, I decide I don't do that.
Yeah.
Monkey see, monkey do. It's an effective way to survive in small groups of about 150 people when you have social cases of survival to pick from.
Yes. Yes.
The other thing that humans uniquely do, perhaps uniquely do, maybe dolphins do this as well, is we tell stories. We have stories is how we propagate intergenerational information, and we abstract those lessons. And then I'm trying to find the right words for this. So we have an issue with supernormal stimulation. We can't help it. Things that are unreal, stories of the unreal, still motivate and stimulate us. We get sad when Mufasa dies, right? We can't help it.
Okay.
But those stories can be unreal. I can be telling you a story that's fundamentally false, and you can't help but emulate what you see on the TV screen or you hear from a story, even though the story might be false, right? So the mechanism of this person did that and got the fish and I want the fish, it breaks down because this person did this and they got that, right? This person said this and they were a really bad guy in the story, but maybe they had a good point. Or this person had this behavior and they had this result. And we cannot help but emulate what we see because we see, yes, I want that result. But it's an unreal result. It's supernormal stimulation. It's fictitious. We can't help that. That's baked into us, this susceptibility to propaganda is what it is. And there are two edge cases here that, or two cases that scare me. One is false positives. A false positive for propaganda is where you see something that's a story. This person did this and had great success, and you emulate that, and you don't get the success, right? It's a false story, false positive. A false negative, this is also interesting. A false negative is when someone from an undesirable social state says something that's right, has a behavior that is correct, but you assess it as false because they're in a bad state. Because we can't help it. That guy's a loser. He said 2 and 2 is 4. It's got to be 5. So we have this susceptibility to this mismatch in propaganda. Propaganda doesn't reconcile with reality, and we can't help it. We live in our heads. We don't live in the natural world. And I think that this drives the divide in politics because we don't seek out what nourishes us, we seek out what stimulates us, right? So this, like fake breasts, breast implants, people go for that. It's a false signal. It's destroyed the mammary glands, like the function of those organs has been destroyed, but we go for those. In media and in technology, and technology is accelerating. And maybe it doesn't even need to accelerate in order to have this effect. We have, as storytellers, a dilemma where we have to sell stimulation. You have to get eyeballs. It does not have to be representative of reality. We're selling Turkish delight here. We're picking 1 or 2 cases of police brutality to show the world, and the world cannot help but see that as representative of their reality, though it is not. It's not real. We're doing that repeatedly, and that continually fractures social groups and identities that have their own unique palettes for stimulation. They need their echo chambers. They need these things. And ultimately, I would hesitate to say it's the media because it's not necessarily, though the media is a driving part of it, it's really our susceptibility to propaganda, our susceptibility to conflate or rather take stimulation that doesn't line up well with reality. That's the flaw. That's one of the flaws in larger than 150 groups of humans. It's one of the flaws in that. So as society scales up, the effects of propaganda are amplified. And I think that ultimately is what drives division. It's what drives perhaps history, perhaps a lot of things.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And I can see with the technology makes those false positives and false negatives readily available to huge populations.
That's right.
Technology, and it makes it available. It is selective. It is disingenuous at times.
It accelerates that
It
process.
accelerates, very good. That's
Right.
for a word. It accelerates that process. Absolutely.
Because look at the competitive dynamic of media and storytellers, I should say. If you're a storyteller, you have to get to the direct stimulation faster than your competition.
Yes.
So the latency of telling those untruths, that's why people talk in sound bites now. Maybe one of the reasons why I really like this, and I just made the mic pop noise, is because in long, free form, we can discuss and share full ideas and nuances. And audiences are hungry for that, because at some point, if you are eating things that are stimulating but not nourishing, your body being malnourished, when it finds something that does nourish it, it'll switch to that. It has a bit of a need for that. We have a little bit of a rebound. We're not a terribly designed species. We have rebounds to these things, but this is a very difficult and deep flaw in what makes humans humans. Look, I love our species. It's a great species most of the time.
Yes. A lot of food for thought.
Yeah.
I can't say that there's anything I disagree with. It's a problem. I don't know what the solution is. Control of the media, that sort of doesn't go well with me. Who's controlling, who's deciding? It's always a problem.
That's a good question about
I
solutions.
practice self-censorship. But then the problem with that, it leads to the confirmation bias. I only look at things that can confirm what I already know or what I want to know.
Right.
So
Everyone's guilty of that. And I don't think you can...
I've gotten rid of whole segments of my family on Facebook. I've unfriended them because I didn't like what they were saying.
Like, we don't talk about Facebook and Twitter. Like that's even crazier. Okay, so the merger of tech media as a single entity is that development is a threat, an open threat to our republic. And this is
absolutely.
This is different.
The monetizing of Facebook and the targeting of ads based upon postings
it used to be.
I have an ad blocker. I don't get ads anywhere.
That's the only way to use the internet. That and like a VPN.
And I use something called TrackOff that sends me all over the world, actually. So
well, yeah, that's that guy.
It's not paranoia. It's just.
It's good practice. Yeah. So, you're going to be abundantly aware of this, but Facebook went from selling you to advertisers to now manufacturing social consent.
Yes.
That's its business model.
Absolutely.
So if you want to amplify economic relationships with China beyond their sustainability point, Facebook is there to sell you that. So, not Facebook, it's all of them. They all have to,
right.
That's the new thing. They can shift the topology of the society's ability to consent to things.
Even email is doing it too. I don't get ads on Yahoo. I have 3 email accounts. I don't get ads, and they're constantly badgering me, saying, turn off your ad blocker. If you don't turn off your ad blocker, you're not going to have access to all the functionality.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that's exactly why I have that. I know that portion of your functionality I'm not interested in. That's a good practice, right? So being able to censor out stuff that's known to be unhealthy for you, that's a good practice. But the issue with that is I think that people do need to be exposed to ideas that are deeply, deeply unsettling to them.
Yes.
But in a way that's not, there's a nuance there, because if I just,
That doesn't plate their prejudices or doesn't manipulate their prejudices.
right, and outrage them so much, like, I can't just show you the picture of the bad man and be like, oh, look, orange man bad, or whoever it is. And look, one of the things about psychology is that personal identity is more born through opposition than through agreement. People that when you can look at this in human development, when adolescents, when teenagers enter the rebellious phase, it's because they're forming a social identity.
That's correct.
And that's the mechanism by which
such a pain in the neck.
They have to be.
Because the rest of us are conforming. And it's jarring. And they pay a price for it.
Yes.
Most teenagers come out of their teenage years conformists.
Okay. I see that. I don't necessarily think that conformity, I certainly don't think that conformity by itself is something to be eschewed. It's not for me. In a lot of ways, I'm a nonconformist. Yeah, of course, right? Like, and I think in a way, everyone thinks of themselves as a nonconformist. Again, the latent greatness in men, like everyone, men and women too, everyone sees himself as the struggling hero of their life, and every one of them is correct. And I would definitely say that if the circumstances are right, any one person can do great things.
That's correct. I agree with that.
Yeah.
We all have that innate potential.
Well, that is true. You and I agree on that. Now, there's also another personality type or suite of personality traits where people have an inferiority-superiority complex. They feel deeply inferior or deeply insecure, and they critique other people. Yeah. Again, their identity is born through oppositions. They just say, screw those people. And they find themselves quickly departing into some very extreme corner of the political or ideological landscape. And that's becoming very common. People, particularly in my generation, have this inferiority-superiority complex. And maybe it's because they don't understand the dynamics of esteem. Like, I don't like the term self-esteem because I think it just is esteem in general. You don't get self-esteem because you feel yourself to be superior to others. You oftentimes you get esteem and confidence because you hold others to a high standard. If you appreciate others and you,
I would say you gain esteem.
Yes.
Self-esteem, if you will.
Right.
Or esteem from a very quiet self-confidence. Not necessarily being obnoxious, but just being at ease with oneself.
Yes. I think though there is a connection between being at ease with oneself and being okay with other people and thinking highly of other people. I think it's okay to think highly of yourself as long as you also think highly of others.
I agree. Absolutely.
So going back to this superiority-inferiority complex, somewhere along the line, either in crystallography, there are spiral and slip dislocations, and they cause wonky things to happen. Somewhere it seems to be in these people's personalities, seems to be some spiral dislocation there, where they're not able to generate esteem through that feedback loop, and it turns negative. They think lesser of other people, and they end up thinking lesser of themselves, and so on and so forth. Instead of building esteem, they destroy it, and they end up going down this path that makes them a pariah in society ultimately. I think I see a lot of that in my generation, much more so than other generations, probably because we live in these little echo chambers. And in that echo chamber, people who have a similar enough ideology to you but common enemies can feed off each other, and this negativity just kind of compounds. Absolutely. I think that's going on a lot with young people today. I don't see a solution to that because once...
I was just going to say exactly that.
Yeah.
I don't know the cause.
Right.
I don't know the solution. What I find sad is people of my generation
Mm-hmm.
who carry the emotional scars of their childhood into their 70s and 80s.
That's irrevocable. You can't. One of the reasons why I tried to learn calculus was because
You're right.
the majority of your memories and experience, the majority of your life's novelty, doesn't happen on this linear distribution. It's a quadratic.
Yes.
So it actually starts out really high. The relationship is like the first day of your life. That first day is, as a derivative, so it's d of x, right? So that first day of your life is 100% of your life. The second day is 50%. The third day is 30%, and so on and so forth. It's this ever diminishing, convergent series of time. So the novelty kind of peaks and we form our core identity early on in our life. And unfortunately, the traumas come with that. Maybe not so unfortunately, because over time, probably the best thing about adulthood is if you have time to reflect on and heal past your traumas or get over them. I don't think you heal them. Like human minds do not work like human bodies work. Human bodies, if I have a cut or if I have a problem, the body will heal it. Our minds behave more like trees. Trees don't have a choice. If they're wounded, they kind of just have to grow around and grow past their wound. It might even rot. In fact, another interesting thing about trees is that the inside of them is actually dead. The lignin,
That's right. Yeah.
they only live on the surface area of them.
Right.
I think a mind really only lives on the surface area of itself. I might have said something really bad.
You just cover so much ground.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
What you're saying, what it means to me, is that we don't access our full potential because we're living on the surface.
Yes.
I see that day in and day out. Some of the other things that you mentioned, the wounds that we carry, are there methodologies that can be put into effect to mitigate or eliminate those psychological, emotional, whatever, wounds?
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, most of psychology, depth psychology, than sitting and talking with a psychiatrist,
Mm-hmm.
does not even come close to getting to those underlying issues.
Yeah.
The goal is to make a person comfortable in his or her
Dysfunctions,
society,
yeah.
even though society itself may be dysfunctional.
Oh, yeah. That is.
That is the goal that I see of a lot of so-called depth psychology.
Yeah, and therapists. Right, like
Right.
a therapist will come at me and they'll be like, and I'll say like, "What's the goal here? You want me to work and pay taxes?" I'm like, I'm obviously capable of doing that. That's trivially anyone, everyone
Right.
can and should be able to do that.
And the psychiatrist, the therapist, also brings
Mhm.
his or her own social norms and expectations.
Right.
As much as he or she likes to think that he is immune to them or above them or operates
That's why
outside of them.
they like to put a Band-Aid over that. We call it clinical psychology. Don't worry. We don't bring our own traumas
So
and vomit
while
them into
there are
others.
methodologies, and there probably are,
Hmm.
uh,
I think life, generally. I think going out and living more experiences.
see, and you hit on so many different things.
Mhm.
Do we have the innate ability to heal ourselves?
I would say no.
And you talked about, you said,
No.
well,
Right.
you got ahead of me.
Sorry.
And I'm going to say to that, I agree 100%. And the reason for that, Brian,
Mm-hmm.
is on our own, we don't have the frame of reference.
Right.
We're operating and regurgitating the same garbage over and reacting to it
I think
over and over again. And until we take ourselves out as disinterested individuals
mm-hmm.
with a frame of reference that is different from us and our neuroses, psychoses, or whatever you want to call them, our perks, our
Right. The
whatever.
quirks and
Quirks.
problems.
Quirks, that's what I meant to say, yes. We can't do it. I think you are absolutely correct in that. And yet, we think we can. We delude ourselves into thinking we can.
It's a different mechanism. I say healing in a very technical sense. I don't believe in healing as we understand it. Like, oh, look, I cut my skin, it heals over.
That's right.
But it is very much like a tree. If you lop off a limb of the tree either lets that rot in and kills the organism, or it grows around it.
Yes.
And most of those traumas that we have early on in life, if we can continue growing and then later reflect on those traumas having grown over them, some of these traumas are very, as an adult, if we can look back on them with meaning, we can find how trivial, and often we do. Oftentimes, when we look back and we laughed, we look back and cry, and oftentimes when we look back and cry, we look back and laugh. There are traumas that can cause deep dysfunctions that are trivial. Things like when I was probably less than 1, I heard a loud truck noise, and that deeply bothered me in that moment, right? But I didn't have the mechanisms. Like I didn't understand what a truck was, or I didn't frame of reference, right? And later,
all those pieces were missing.
Later on, you get that. Or phobias, like I'm afraid of needles. Why was I afraid of needles? Because my mom hates needles, and I saw her take a shot, and she didn't like it. And if my mom, who's as a young person, they're like a god to you, then that must be horrible if it mildly bothered her. So that trauma didn't just that phobia didn't just transfer; it mutated and became worse. So I'm like very needle phobic. But now later as an adult, I can conscientiously train myself to be less afraid of needles. And that's not a factor of necessarily healing. It's just growing over the trauma and in a way encapsulating it. So just like how trees and plants have a way of healing in a way, it's not the same as how we bodily understand healing. We have ways of getting over our traumas, though not correcting them, because those were parts of our development that did not develop, that had traumas. The tree doesn't grow back and grow that limb that it was missing. It grows over where it was.
How flexible is the human brain, and is it capable of being rewired?
That is a good question.
We already know the answer.
I would say that human beings are as plastic as their circumstances demand. I see this in a lot of cases, and you see this in people who have a field that they love that almost defines them, and then later on in life, they grow into some other field. Their circumstances change. They adopt different identities, different mechanisms for their identity, and they go from there.
I'm talking about something at a very visceral level.
Oh, yeah. I don't believe that you can change your inborn characteristics. I think we make allowances for that in any decent society. We make allowances that the inborn characteristics should not be part of how we judge or assess an individual. I can't change. I can't change the skin tone that I was born into, but I also can't change
the arbitrary characteristics. Okay.
Right.
But you also can't change. I get you off. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I can't change. I can't change the fact that I grew up white, right? So that's a softer epiphenomena that's a result of something that I have no control over, how I was born. It's not a factor of my character. I don't. This is something that I wanted to harp on because I just kind of touched on a subject like, I can't, change the fact that I'm white or black or whatever. I don't buy the argument that people who are born with different characteristics cannot fundamentally understand each other and have to hold each other to different intersectional, categories, because humans have the ability to empathize with one another. I can empathize, someone who is born in a vastly different scenario can, of course, understand what it is like to be me. And I can, of course, understand what it's like to be them. We are not discrete to that extent. We live in our phaneron, in our own heads. And that is I wouldn't call it plastic, I would call it fluid. That's very adaptive. Especially for empaths, like people who are very empathetic, when they're talking around people with an accent, they adopt that, they can't help it. They adopt those mannerisms. So we can, of course, jump into each other's heads. This is how language works. It works through, and maybe, not even maybe, you certainly may be able to correct me on these things if I'm very wrong, but language seems to work by discrete packets of information through a network and then emulation from there. So I emulate Dr. Allan Bomhard in my head to try to understand you, and you emulate that kid across the table. And it seems to be that mechanism, that way of relating things, that's how that works very well. I can say a blue square and you know what I mean. Though your qualia for blue might be different from my qualia of blue, the effectiveness of the communication is nonetheless there. So likewise, I believe in empathy across people with very vastly different life experiences. I don't believe that those are discrete. I think it's in fact evil to say that you can't understand somebody with a different set of characteristics or life experiences. Of course you can. It's anti-human to say otherwise. Because that if there's any hope for our species or in our species, it's in our ability to empathize with one another and our ability to understand one another, which is one of the reasons why linguistics and being able to relate with one another is a critical field to what it means to be human. And you see these people.
It's a very, very touchy topic.
Why?
I think most people block their empathy. Empathy is being able to relate to another person on a very deep, visceral level. And I'll give you an example, 2 examples from where I used to work. A coworker wanted to introduce me to his lady friend. They've since gotten married, they have 2 kids now. In any case, we went out to the parking lot. The minute she got out of the car, I knew I was going to like her.
Oh.
I've never changed that opinion of her. Another woman came in and she made my skin crawl. And she turned out to be mean and nasty to almost everybody. She needed me. I was the IT support, so she did. But I had those gut reactions. Those people have not learned to trust their gut reactions. They don't cultivate those gut reactions. In addition to which, there are things that block empathy. For example, anger is its antithesis. You can't be angry and empathetic at the same time. They are conflicting.
Maybe so. I don't believe that anger in and of itself is a vice. I think we have this full suite of human emotions that have evolved for specific needs. Anger is there probably largely to protect what we have. It's probably a protection mechanism. Because anger is really correlated with violence, and violence is the language of survival. when it comes down to too few resources for too many people, you do reach into these sorts of areas where our species has been repeatedly throughout its existence. So I think it's there to protect. I think you can be angry with someone that you understand. And more importantly, you can be angry with someone because you understand them.
It's very hard for me to react in anger.
Yes.
I can't sustain it. I can't hold a grudge.
Mm.
Doesn't mean I don't get upset. I'm not explosive. I don't yell. I don't scream. I'm
Right.
not violent. Perhaps that goes back to my upbringing. I was always shorter, thinner, and weaker than
Right.
everybody else. And I found that when I reacted that way, I got my butt.
Violence. Right.
I lost. Always. I lost. I mean,
Maybe so.
this is not the way to do this. So I learned it just...
I see people. Yes, it might be you might be in a specific category where you've learned not to be angry, but I do see people who get angry about things that I think are angry for good reasons and are angry not because they don't care but because they do, and are mistreated on behalf of their anger and their explosiveness and their exuberance. They're mistreated reactively, like, oh, calm that person down. They might be in the right. Sometimes you do have to protect what's right, as far as you can tell. And I think oftentimes we are unfair to people who are violent and angry, and we condemn them in ways that we maybe ought not. Now, violence and anger is, in our more civilized society, as we like to think of that, we try to breed out those emotions.
What purpose do they serve? And you've answered that partially.
Protection.
However,
Mm-hmm.
we pay a price, a physiological price,
Of course.
for that kind of a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be even more than that.
Oh, it's greatly
People
emotional.
get
Yeah.
Angry at police officers. Right. and not a wise or
Right.
well thought out reaction.
I would agree that anger perhaps inherently is destructive. But oftentimes destructive means are for a preserving end. If you're about to, if you can cut your losses, that's an important strategy to take in a lot of stressful situations.
Does it impede our ability to react in other ways? It does.
Mm-hmm.
Can we react in ways that diffuse a situation, in ways that achieve our goals without necessarily causing the physiological
Right.
harm to ourselves that anger brings about?
I would agree that those
Part of that goes back to my training.
Yes.
I was relatively good at it, being a spy, because nobody ever suspected. It's just not part of my demeanor.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. You seem like a total spy to me. Like, if I had to suspect anyone, Alan, no, in league with the Russians, I see. Look, we can fabricate that about anyone. If we got it for Donald Trump, we can get it for you.
Now,
No.
the downside about that is if I want to find out information, I know how to find it out usually without people suspecting that I'm probing.
That's good. Well, I mean, that's an evolutionary advantage. So you brought up a good topic, or a good point, about whether more peaceful, diffusing means produce better ends.
Yeah.
And I think they do, and they can most of the time. Sometimes, so this goes into an issue that I have sort of with history, that like people who write history or look at history who might be a little bit short-sighted or a little bit dull say, man, it's really a convenience that all the good guys win every war, right? History, I don't think that history is written by the victors. I think propaganda is written by the victors and history is written by the observers. But one issue that I have with, in a term, compliance and complacency and being meek, is you can be wronged and you can be stolen from and you can be pigeonholed into a position, into a losing position if you rely too much on peace. Some things are worth combating kinetically, ideologically, legally. Some things are worth being particularly angry and combative over.
I agree.
Right.
That some things need to be addressed.
Right. But do they need to be addressed with violence and anger?
Yeah.
I don't know either. We don't have any way to do
it's certainly a very quick way.
Mm-hmm.
Getting punched in the nose for making a snide comment about somebody's wife will make one think about saying anything.
Right.
Again.
Or fighting a civil war over slavery.
Yes.
Sometimes those things are, the violence is necessary. And
there are times when I would have to admit, when there is no other option, that may be the only choice.
It does shortcut and override nuance that is nonetheless there.
Yes.
Like if you talk to people who are like, the people who are like way into the Sons of Confederacy, they bring up many valid points about the Civil War and the oversimplification of the state of things. There are many wisdoms to glean from that. This is one particularly beautiful wisdom I got from someone who was discussing slavery in a more nuanced light than you particularly see it portrayed. The president of the Confederacy delivered a point that slaves in the South often lived more materially comfortable lives than their free counterparts in the North. The free counterparts in the North were often beggars, and people were very racist, and so on and so forth. They lived harder lives, and they were just well taken care of. And the response that I heard to that point, though it was valid, that's true, that what he said was true, and that's why it's troubling. The response that I heard from that was from a black rights activist, and it was very beautiful. He said, "The lion that hunts for his food and may not eat tonight in the savannah does not envy the lion that is fed everything but lives in a cage." The value of freedom, even with the consequences of freedom, is inherently the greater value than comfort. You can be comfortable but not at peace, and you can be greatly uncomfortable but deeply at peace. So I think that was nuanced. Now, the issue there is that most people are oriented towards comfort and not freedom. Most people are compliance people. They comply, they conform.
Right, that's what we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They sacrifice that freedom so that they might have comfort. That's the trade-off. And that has to be most people in a society. So when you bring up that point that the president of the Confederacy made, people shout it down, and they don't like that because they are comfort people. They're not freedom people. They don't like it. They say, no, that's not true. Look at these cases where slaves were whipped. By the way, the instances where that did happen, which it did, and it was terrible, and it shouldn't have happened at all. The fact that it did happen was very bad. The instances that did are those outliers, like in the media. They are the reason why those were photographed in times where photographs were scarce was because they're very novel. They're very indicative of stuff. They're not representative of how it actually was for the bulk of things. So in a way, the violence, the conflict, and the struggle for survival, and having a victor that writes history afterwards, it does plow over nuance. But sometimes it's a shortcut to the same ends that a more evil means would drag out. So if they did, suppose that the United States had not fought a civil war and it said the South may keep its slaves and the North stays free, and we drag this on through nuance for generations. would the hundreds of thousands of Americans who died fighting that war, would that be worth the absolute lack of freedom for the people that lived in the South as slaves?
Well, the Civil War was not
Solely.
initiated
Mm-hmm.
because I had a thought and I lost it. It just,
That's life.
as it was coming out of my mouth.
Escapes. The Civil War wasn't initiated by or because? One of those. Trying to think here. What I had said before was
Everybody benefited from slavery, including the North.
yes.
All of the unmanufactured products
Mm-hmm.
were shipped north
To be
turned
manufactured.
into fabric or cigarettes or dye or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a huge manufacturing base in the South. It was primarily a very rich agricultural region.
It remains that way today.
And it remains that way, though it's changing. It's
Yes.
changing considerably.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody had a stake in the perpetuation of slavery.
Yes. It was a hard button to push to say abolish that.
And visiting the Avery Institute in Charleston, you
Mhm.
see that there were many nuances. There were freed blacks who owned slaves.
Yeah. I believe there were slave states in the North and free states in the South as well. No, I might be wrong about that.
Not
No.
that I'm aware of.
Okay. Pennsylvania. No. All right.
But no, the thought.
The nuances that were there were plowed over by the violence of fighting a civil war. I don't think I would if I were to rewrite history, I don't think I would write out that violent conflict. I don't think I would change it. It's hard to
We've
say.
gotten to the point
Yeah.
in this country at that time where there was no reconciliation of ideologies.
Now, do we see a parallel between then and now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was in the back of my mind while I was saying that. And no country can exist like that, to paraphrase.
I would be...
Like,
Yeah, I see that a lot. And while this is one thing that I have to stress to people. I'm not a Trump supporter, but oftentimes I am a Trump defender because I see that that person gives voice to people who do not typically have a voice in power. The power dynamic in this country is asymmetrical, to say the least. We can talk about Donald Trump in ways... I can talk about my impression of him psychologically. We might find some common ground to have a conversation on that particular guy. Donald Trump grew up rich. He was rich from birth, from before he was born. He would have been rich. And approximately 100% of the people that he came in contact with, all throughout his entire life, childhood,
yeah.
they all had to be, most of them had to be social climbers. They mostly wanted stuff from him.
Yeah.
They wanted a job, they wanted something, they wanted to take advantage of him. That's his relationship to every one of his wives. I don't think his children. I don't think that. I think that creates a very disconnected and warped person in a lot of senses, a very damaged person who does not get to experience empathy and sympathy from other people.
Mary Trump said the same thing.
They experience exploitation and repeated exploitation. Someone's trying to exploit me, I exploit them, there's a transaction. I think those are the conditions under which Donald Trump grew up and formed his identity. I think the closest thing, maybe apart from his immediate family, that Donald Trump had that he experienced love from was from workers that were far below him who admired him for his gaudiness. the common construction guy probably looked up to Trump. That's probably the closest thing Donald Trump ever had to love, was the idea of the common man. Yes, everyone in my immediate vicinity, they are vindictive, slimy, social climber people.
Including members of his own family.
Of course. But the common man is something that, one, Donald Trump experiences loving him, or at least admiring him. And I think he has that conception of the common man, the idea, maybe not the individual case, maybe not this particular guy, but the idea of the common man, that makes that populist, the kind of person who has a voice for the common man. Now, again, the power dynamic is very asymmetrical. It very much favors social climbers. Going back to the people who are going back to the false positive or false negative situation with the vulnerability that we have to propaganda. Social climbers will deny people who are right, but in a bad social situation. So I think that I got off topic a little bit, but I think that Trump is in a position where he's in love with the idea of the common man, and that he exists in a world where power is lopsided on behalf of these social climbing people that he's around all the time. It certainly is. We live in a very vertically stacked hierarchy. And when we saw the Trump presidency, when we saw him take seats of power, we saw a lot of friction between the ruling classes. And they unanimously agreed, we get him out. He goes. We will change the rules of our democracy to make sure that he goes. Because if you look at what gets represented, it's not the common person, it's interests. It's people who are social climbers. It's those people that get power to act on their behalf, not the common person. And if you look at, I don't want to say Trump's policies because he's not a policy genius. He's not, in a lot of ways, he's brilliant as the common man is brilliant, but he's not like eloquent and nuanced about things. But the directions in which Donald Trump went, the sympathy of bringing jobs back to the United States is a very commonly rung sympathy. It's never been acted on before because the elite, the social climbers of our society, every corporation exists on the same business model. You take resources from the third world, you ship it to the developing world to be manufactured into products, and you ship it to the developed world to be sold. It's a pipeline, one way, where ultimately the vision for us, the Americans, the vision for us is we are to be indebted consumers. That's what's most ideal. That is what is most advantageous to major corporations, is indebted consumers. Not empowered, not able to produce, and certainly not able to compete. We have no import tax, but we have an export tax. The United States has inherited its position post-World War II of having to rebuild the world to bribe up an alliance to contain the Soviets. We've inherited that through 3 generations to be in a situation where we just passed a omnibus spending bill where the majority of that money went to other countries for kickbacks, not for kickbacks, but because the United States is the power dynamic is increasingly disconnected from its people. And I saw Trump as oftentimes a disruptor, and I saw the language that's used by social climbers to denounce and oust those kinds of people. Everyone has been shouted down by a crowd before, particularly a crowd of popular people. Everyone has done that, and we saw that replete. Trump could do no right, and his detractors could do no wrong. We saw enormous, and still see enormous double standards today. Trump criticizers can be violent and throw firebombs into cities, but Trump supporters have the National Guard preemptively installed in Washington, D.C. All of the hotels in the Trump rallies get bought up to keep them empty. You are not allowed to. The asymmetry in support of versus detracting from Donald Trump is crazy. Not because of Trump. It's because of
His rooms get bought up by whom?
No. the hotels in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
during Trump rallies
Yes.
get bought up by
To prevent
actual protesters from or supporters.
absolutely
Right.
his supporters would not be welcome. Many of his supporters
Mhm.
would not be welcome in his properties.
I don't know if I believe that, unless you're talking about what kind of supporters are you talking about?
He caters to the wealthy.
Some of his businesses, yes,
Some of his businesses.
yes,
All of his businesses.
right. But I was talking about he called for a Trump rally in D.C. and as a shady, underhanded means to make sure that logistically it's hard to get those people there. One, the National Guard has preemptively been called. Two, the leader of the Proud Boys has preemptively been arrested. Three, all of the hotels, the ability to have these people stay in Washington, D.C., those rooms have been bought up and will go empty. It's just a strategy that we have.
Who bought them?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I know it's been done.
I don't necessarily agree with everything you say.
Okay.
Um,
Neither do I. So don't feel bad.
I don't like the thinking.
Mhm.
I don't like the rhetoric of many Trump supporters. And Trump supporters are in my family.
Mm-hmm.
People whose relationships I value very, very much. Who don't think the
Yeah.
way I don't hear them. They're not racists,
Mm-hmm.
like black people in my family. They're not anti-immigrant. One is. My brother is too. It's insane. Black people in our family, and he moves down from New Jersey to South Carolina, and the first thing he wants to do is hang a Confederate flag, battle flag. I talked him out of it.
You know, we had like a big thing in our state where we got rid of that.
Like, born, raised in New Jersey. What? Black people and your ex-wife married a black man.
Yeah. There are,
Who you're friendly with.
mind you, that
I don't understand the mentality that denigrates other people, immigrants, women, gay people.
well, okay.
All of the
Minorities and fringe groups, right?
The minorities and the targets. I don't like people being locked in jails, in cages, children being locked in jail, in cages.
Okay, so there's children locked in cages.
I don't like a lot of the policies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the rhetoric, not coming from Donald Trump.
His supporters, right?
I'm talking about his supporters. I don't like the anger. I don't like the hatred. I don't like. I don't relate to it.
I have.
Doesn't mean.
Yeah.
I agree with everything the other side says either.
Right.
I do not.
Right, and that's why I'm in the same camp.
But this bothers me tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
No. Go out and hug a Mexican.
Right. That would probably be good for people. So at the beginning of it, I mentioned that I'm not a Trump supporter. Like I don't. A lot of what he says I find lacking. I don't think he's my guy. But I am a Trump defender because the attacks on him I see as unfair. And I do not like the language of power. Right? I will defend that. Now, I've actually had about the exact...
That's not what I took issue with.
Right. So that's our common ground. By the way, common ground is an electrical term. It is. It's not like a philosophical ground.
I understand.
Yeah. So I find I actually have the exact opposite perception. I can't stand to listen or read Donald Trump for more than like 35 seconds. I have to pause it and say, you should have. I have to. That said, I can't say that. Now, I haven't found in the Trump supporter in terms of dealing with Trump supporters, I haven't found the de facto xenophobia. If you're black and you're a Trump supporter, hey, you're welcome in the family.
I have. In the restaurant, I've had people come in.
Maybe so. Look, I don't think that every Trump supporter is a racist. I do think that pretty much every racist is going to be a Trump supporter. And
My own family, again.
yeah, I think we also do we also do have to be careful of a selection bias. So going back to the children in cages. One, I think that some of that was a political stunt and was manufactured. There was a caravan of people who were seeking asylum. That circumstance is not why we have the asylum law. That's a bad application of the law, and while they're technically correct, that stunt of getting people together, which people in local towns in Mexico complained a lot about, this is not right. There are people from all over doing that. Kids in cages.
They're still in cages.
They are. They were before, too. And we have a nation of 335 million people. And every day about 1.5 million people try to illegally cross this border. We are also, because of our black market in our economy that's 25 times the size of Mexico, we create, by matters of our policy, not Mexico's policy, we create the worst cartels in the world right to the southern border of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Right.
Market.
Yes, we created.
The market is my brother
Yeah.
and others. Yeah.
Well,
you're absolutely right.
But look at the dynamics of this. Is that Mexico? This is not a point that Trump probably thought of or made. He probably just found a common enemy, something like that. That's probably what was going on. I'll have to admit, I might be wrong. He might be very nuanced in how he thinks about these things. But our relationship to Mexico is entirely lopsided and one-sided. Our black market is larger than their entire economy. They don't have, de facto, their government and their people do not have any say in their foreign or domestic policy. It's entirely dictated by the United States' willingness to make its own policy and enforce its own border. Mm-hmm. And if we decide to be lackadaisical and say, we won't enforce our border, we won't clamp down on drug control while we have these policies, we won't stop organized crime between the interface of your country and mine, then de facto, Mexico has no say in what happens in Mexico, because it will be dictated, because we have a 25x lever. What we do, their market follows. If we decide we don't want to enforce the border, if we have this crazy drug policy, then they have to deal with the violence that comes from competing illegal drug cartels, where violence is the only regulator of that market for them. They bear the burden of our unwillingness or just our lack of our apathy. If we're apathetic towards what's going on the border, Mexico pays the price.
Drug cartels exist
Mm-hmm.
because there's a market in the United States of America.
Yes,
that is the problem.
I would agree.
Supply and demand. Eliminate the demand, the supply will seek other markets. Suppliers will seek other markets.
The most elegant, and I do believe there is a solution to this particular great problem. The most elegant solution that I've seen is, one, the ultimate ends here is integration with Mexico and no drug violence and no black market in the United States. That should be moved into a regular market. We ultimately don't want to have people who are addicted to substances in the United States. We don't want the violence at the border. We don't want the violence of the cartels. And we don't want this division between the United States and Mexico. We are both North America. We want integration. It's strategic for both of us to be well integrated with one another, more so than the United States' relationship to, say, Canada. The United States should have a better relationship with Mexico than it does with Canada. The most elegant way we get there is by, one, controlling our border, making sure that this is a defined line where black market goods should not easily be able to flow.
It's an absolute impossibility.
True. Absolutely.
Cartels
Mm-hmm.
have submarines.
Yes, they do.
They
And they
bring
fly them over.
goods in
Correct.
to South Carolina. They just
Right.
get off at the beach.
You are not going to. Right. You are.
It's more than the land border.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm well aware of that, but you are not going to. The point is that they have to buy submarines. That becomes more of an inconvenience because there is that line of delineation. That line of delineation, and this is a small footnote of the overall strategy. I don't want to get super stuck on it, but that border, infrastructure along that border is part of a strategy to. You're not, like I said, I'm not trying to stop. I'm not expecting to stop drug trade. I'm expecting to make it more expensive and inconvenienced. Now, it only does so a little bit. If you can make it so that the drugs are more expensive, not for the consumer, but for the drug cartel to get into the country, your next move from then should be to open cordial relationships. I now have this lever. It becomes expensive for you to run this business model. Open cordial relationships with the drug cartels and say, look, I don't want you to be illegal. You, head of drug cartel, probably don't want to be killed by the guy behind you. We should make moves to reconcile and legalize your trade as a normal pharmaceutical product. You only do that when you have leverage, when it becomes more expensive for them to deal with things in the black market as they are now, than to have that discussion with you, because right now you have no fulcrum. We can talk to them, and we do in the CIA and the NSA, the Department of Homeland Security. We talk to them. We get a lot of people killed because their answer is right now, no, it's more profitable for me to have it like it is. But without building a fulcrum to where it's expensive, to where there's some comparative advantage for them to cooperate with us rather than keep things the way they are, we cannot have a negotiating table with which to start this dialogue. It can't happen. It will never happen. So that's why border security, and not in the hopes that it stops the drug cartels, it just makes it to where we can offer them a better solution. We now have a little bit of negotiating room with them. That's why that's integral to the vision that we had talked about with better integration and more legalization, less violence. So we do this. We build a border. We offer the drug cartels concessions, saying, look, we can absolve previous transgressions. You can launder your money through us legitimately this time, right? And you can become more of a corporate entity. We can make steps of decriminalizing specific things. By cooperating with you as the cartel, we incorporate, that's what incorporation means. Yeah. We incorporate you into the state. We will keep your competition illegal, right? So that's another benefit for you. And these people who are addicts here in the United States, we're going to get them clean. They're going to move from doing meth to doing Adderall, which is the same thing, but it has vastly different social profiles and social consequences. Addiction in the United States can now go down because addiction is part of the business model for cartels. They have to be intensely and dysfunctionally addicted. Pharmaceuticals, people are still addicted, but they're functionally addicted. Less, maybe still dysfunctional, but less so. I would prefer them to be considered pharmaceutical products than street drugs. This is how we get to that. And a secure border with effective infrastructure is the fulcrum by which that can happen. Again, I don't believe that it's going to stop.
I don't think a secure border is
necessary.
Possible.
Oh, it's not. There will still be drugs and still be crime moving over the border, for sure. And through and around and over and under.
Forgetting about the crime, we started off talking about illegal immigration.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a United States problem. This is a worldwide problem.
Mm-hmm.
I was in London, I was in Soho, and I went into a little trinket shop. And the woman behind the counter, I was speaking to her, and I said, "Where are you from?" And she was a few towns up from where I was, lived in New Jersey. And she just left. She said she came over here to visit, and she just stayed.
Yeah, that's illegal immigration technically.
And likewise, there are approximately, so I read, 1 million American citizens
overstaying visas
in Mexico.
Yes. That's definitely true too.
So it's that type of thing, and I don't know that we necessarily want to stop that.
Right.
The majority of the so-called undocumented aliens or illegal aliens are law-abiding people.
Well,
There are 12 million
yeah. Yes, yeah.
of them living here. Some have been here 20 years. They're contributing to the economy.
And
They're living American lives. Look at the DACA recipients, those who are in the DACA program. These are not criminals. You can't get in if you're a criminal.
Well, most importantly, aside from the economic benefits, which can be weighed and quantified, these are good people.
These are good people. Yes.
Everyone knows an illegal immigrant family who they don't see as some illegal alien. They see them as the name of that person, Francesca or Consuelo.
Right.
That's who they see. And it's not right to say their presence here in the country is necessarily a crime. Now, it is on paper a crime, and there does need to be what defines a border, a country is its border.
Had a solution.
What was? Oh yeah,
Amnesty to everybody.
right.
And they kept coming, and so
I think I like to see two problems and turn them into a solution. I think that we should offer citizenship after service as a means of amnesty for those people. So if they get into the armed forces, that's a service. If they do enough community service,
I think if they've been here a certain length of time and have
naturalized citizens. Right. Now, the other issue is how do you when you do that, is it fair to the other people who are going through the legal immigration process? Does that create another problem where there's an influx of illegal immigrants who now see, oh, it's okay, it's free? That it's not sustainable to indefinitely intake, particularly for countries like the United States. Right.
A solution has to be found that takes into consideration both the legal requirements and the fact that these people are here.
Right. But I'm interested as well.
I propose doing a swap. We send back all of the illegal immigrants here, and all of the illegal Americans around the world have to come back.
Yeah.
And the same thing applies that has been said of Mexicans, rapists, and everything. Many illegal Americans living legally abroad have done so to escape the
crimes.
criminal justice system in the United States of America.
That's certainly a good point.
So
I want to clarify the rapist quote. He said there are rapists, not they are. No one would conceivably accuse like hundreds of thousands of people every week of being all rapists.
I don't consider that to be anything worth mentioning.
It's
there
not.
Are rapists in New York who were born in
Yeah, exactly. One of them's the president, right? No,
we have a
taking a
legal
jab.
system to deal with them, and they should face the same
Sure.
punishments or consequences for their actions that everybody else faces. If that means deportation.
Right. It's very othering, and it's very underhanded for them to say, there are. Of course there are. Like this is a large enough group to where
anything you can say.
You can probably also sell. There are scientists. Well, yeah. Like there's gonna.
It's a meaningless statement.
Yeah.
It is designed to arouse.
It's a soundbite.
Yeah, it's a soundbite.
Right.
It absolutely is, and it appeals to emotional side, and a lot of what I see on Facebook.
It appeals to people's confirmation, the confirmation bias, right? They want to believe that like the border is where like all these bad people. In a way, there is some truth to the idea that there's bad stuff going to and from the border. There's a lot of that, and it's organized by our policies. That's technically true.
I told you I work for Petro.
No.
Yeah, I didn't mention it. Okay, I work for Petro now on the weekends.
Oh yeah.
Part of the training that we go through is human trafficking inside the United States.
Yes.
Stolen vehicles that are transported, they stop to get gasoline inside the United States. There's crime everywhere.
Right.
United States citizens.
Yeah, that's true. Now, but the means by which we deal with crime across borders there's legal infrastructure for how we deal with that, because we have to respect Mexico's sovereignty and they have to respect ours. Inside the United States, that is going to be a different. The justice system is going to behave differently because there's not two different sovereignties fighting over how you do this.
That's correct.
So there are some practical limitations to that. Of course, I'm pro-immigrant with maybe one or two caveats. I haven't sold myself this idea, but I don't know if I fully accept the H-1B as wholly good, because the United States is able to asymmetrically import an awful lot of immigrants. And when we can cherry pick the best and the brightest from around the world, we have no means to make them here at home. We have no reason to invest in the bright people in the United States. We have no reason to invest in STEM. It's a shortcut.
It's a shortcut, but
Yeah.
there's also, in many cases, a shortage in particular industries
Yes.
of trained Americans.
Yes, absolutely.
Things have changed. In 1892, my grandmother got on a boat, the Dania, in Hamburg, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
She had no birth certificate, no visa, no passport. She got on a boat. She got off at Ellis Island. I went to the Ellis Island site.
Mm-hmm.
She was processed through.
Come on through.
She had to be disease-free and so on and so forth. Nothing.
One-
No papers at all. Zero. And they came at that time
Mm-hmm.
in the millions
Yes.
from Eastern Europe and Germany.
Right. Now the climate. Let's look at the climate of the late 1800s and the massive immigration waves that we've had from the European immigration waves that the United
Yes.
States has had. Let's look at the good and the bad. One is, we had a frontier at the time. We were trying to populate the country. The population was probably, I'm guesstimating, somewhere around 40 to 50 million at the time. Somewhere around there. That might be a good estimate. It might be higher, might be lower. But we had a frontier to populate. We were also systematically taking a lot of land from natives, and that's why we had to populate it. It was a stake on other people's land. The manifest destiny, that's what it was. So we would import anyone at that point. Now that we have ran out of our frontier, physical frontier, with which to populate, to steal other stuff from other people, the dynamic has to change from being able to accept basically anybody because you're trying to occupy, to now a much more bureaucratic, where does it benefit us in a very abstract sense? And that's what shapes our immigration policy. I'm not a fan that that's the reality, right? I wish we could accept everyone all the time. We had this infinite frontier to continually do that. And I also wish there was a way we had a frontier without having to hurt other people to take it from it. But this is the reality of human history, is that there's always pros and cons. I don't like the bureaucracy surrounding immigration. I don't like bureaucracy at all.
Yeah.
Right. But that's kind of, we ran out of frontier. We have to pick and choose.
My relatives who are anti-immigrant and anti-welfare and all that. Our grandmother
Mm-hmm.
and her father, he was a day laborer. He had trouble finding work.
Mm-hmm.
They lived in flop houses and ate in soup kitchens. That's what passed for welfare in the 1890s. They hate it when I bring that up because everybody loved my grandmother.
Mm-hmm. I about the bureaucracy surrounding welfare. The right-wing Trump supporter people who go bah about welfare, in a lot of cases they're right. The welfare system, there's a lot, wherever there's a bureaucracy, there's just a lot of surface area for exploitation.
There's exploitation. There are people who live on welfare as a profession,
Yeah.
occupation. occupation. Everybody knows this.
Right.
So you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Of course, right.
You reform, and if that doesn't work, you reform again until you get it right.
Well,
And you're never going to get it right.
this might be me in my crazy postulating, but it seems to me that a lot of governmental functions were consequences of kind of the tools they had at the time. We didn't have crowdfunding at the time, so we have to collect the best way to collect taxes from a lot of people, or the best way to fund large ventures is to collect a little bit from a lot of people. So taxation was the best way to do that. There's an important part in history that I have to remind myself of all the time. In the USSR, when Soviet officials came to America and saw a grocery store, they said, this is an obvious plan. This couldn't possibly be real. And I think it was Reagan at the time said, no, take a look at other ones. And these were the officials, the smart Soviets. The Soviet culture at that time could not comprehend that the bread, because in the Soviet Union, the bread and the food was rationed out. That was a state function and a state monopoly. Mm-hmm. They told their school children that the government in America does not even give their countrymen bread. Doesn't do it. They could not comprehend that free people could form a market, and from this chain of complex stuff that we still don't understand to this day, we study it because we don't understand it, can supply and functionally supply supermarkets, food, and so on and so forth. Because that was done by bureaucracy that did a really terrible job of doing it. It was just awful. There were food shortages, like probably the worst problems, some of the worst humanitarian crises were the starving of Ukraine by bureaucracy. So, worst things ever. We are probably in a state of similar ignorance about pretty much everything government does. It is very difficult to comprehend how free peoples will self-organize and provide for needs. If you say, let's say we took away the Department of Education, right? Do you think people wouldn't educate themselves? Like, it doesn't take much to learn, especially nowadays. Like, this is a form of learning. If you're consuming it, it's a form of learning. We are probably better at providing for our own needs for pretty much everything that the government does than the job that we would do providing for ourselves is probably better. And we're probably extraordinarily blind to that. In the same way that the Soviets, the best Soviets, still just didn't believe and couldn't understand it. In that same breath, the welfare state is highly bureaucratic, highly dysfunctional in a lot of ways. There are babies in that bathwater for sure, but there's an awful lot of dirty bathwater. Yeah. And I don't think that baby needs to be swimming in filthy bathwater. I think we have better bathwater than that. I think we can do a better job of welfare without the bureaucracy, without the government being involved. I think we can provide for roads and all these things that we imagine that government solely can do. I think we can do those as communities through crowdfunding, through other means, possibly technological, that our mindset does not have the confidence or the familiarity to know that we would provide for those things. I think that that's true for most things. I think that in a lot of ways, what we consider to be a government, this idea of like firefighters and policemen and civic functions and whatnot, that is the fringe exception of what the government barely does and does very poorly. The majority of what the government does is consolidate power. That is what a state does. Every state, every time, all throughout history. That is their function, consolidate power. That is why businesses, when they get to a certain size, they incorporate into the state, and they are an arm of the state at that point, more or less by proxy. There's a mutually parasitic relationship between governments and corporations.
Sad, but...
Yeah, I think it's accurate.
Yeah, I think it is too.
There exist a lot of people who believe in this propaganda of like the super government that can solve all problems. If you look at the portrayal of the government agents in superhero movies, the government has like flying aircraft carrier stuff because it's the government. But these are greatly dysfunctional people, except for one attribute. They are extraordinarily good at consolidating power. It's like blood in the water to a shark. If there's a way that more power can go to fewer people, that is the way that it will go, as long as you give people control and you expect them to do good things for you. We see this with the coronavirus. We have consolidated enormous amounts of power at an extreme expense to the individual. We have bled out our freedoms. We've seen this in the last year. This is the solution to everything. If you expect the government to give you a solution to any problem, the answer is always give us your freedoms. We will consolidate more power. That is what we do. We have to wear these. These aren't, well, like I like them. I like the science behind wearing masks. I like the dynamics of it. I like the virology. But there are plenty of examples where the procedures that we have make no scientific sense. It simply makes sense from a matter of giving up your liberties and consolidation. They want control. It's like, yeah, the answer to 9/11 was to have everybody take an X-ray. No, it's just, regulation and bureaucracies are not the solution to these problems. They amplify these problems by a lot. Maybe not in the case of the TSA. Luckily, we haven't had terrorist attacks. We didn't really have them before until the government decided to do it. I'm firmly of the camp that I think that there are many layers of conspiracy to the events of September 11th, 2001. And I don't see how... I'm not 100% sold on this, but clearly that those events were a conspiracy from terrorists abroad that had at least either people turning a blind eye, either extreme ineptitude, extreme luck. I see that as a false flag. I'm sorry. I really do. I see those events as a false flag. I see that as either perhaps a very unlikely and unlucky tragedy that has been exploited enormously to eliminate freedoms, to go to war, to do these awful things that we've done. Perhaps it was one of those, but I am of the opinion that it makes more logical sense to assume that the events of September 9/11 or September 11th, 2001 were a false flag operation.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know.
That's the wonderful thing about it.
I find it somewhat hard to believe. You used one word that I really liked, incompetence.
Yeah.
George Bush was in power then. He's not the brightest bulb. However,
Okay.
Wolfowitz was, is, Cheney was, is,
Colin Powell,
and a whole bunch of others.
Mm-hmm.
Was it planned? I doubt it. For a government to plan an operation, our government, like that, and keep it secret and carry it out with that precision.
Manhattan Project happens all the time. There are technologies that are researched fundamentally, developed fully, and implemented before they're discovered in academia or even hypothesized in academia. It's common, especially in aviation, especially in finance. There are sects. There are sects of government, and particularly adjacent to the intelligence agent, adjacent to intelligence agencies. There are sects of government that are extremely competent. What we think of as government, our representatives, are not the government. They are the face of the government. You cannot name the people who are actually the deep state. Those people who are some days they're lobbyists, Other days, they're department heads. They're usually in the administrative layer of government. These are people who pull strings. This is why the SR-71 was this amazing feat of technology that it actually got declassified as the A12 ox cart in like 2010 when it was old. Like that was the precursor to what became the Blackbird. It was so old. Whole technology stacks have their entire life cycle go by without us noticing. The deep state of the government does these things all of the time. That's how they live and die. What we think of as these fools, these incompetent idiots, are the incompetent happy face that gets thrown up.
See, I can't argue with you because I was part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Sitting here thinking, how do I get out of this one?
Right. Well, you can't. The thing is that, yes, there's massive incompetence in the government, but there's also massive competence.
Yes, there is. There absolutely is.
Who, like I said, the Manhattan Project, we all know about that. The effects were abundant. But there's also a dozen other, not even a dozen, just hundreds of other cases of Operation High Jump. Like that was, there's a lot of them. Yeah, no, I fully believe that for the health of the state to be able to pull off a false flag and do that kind of thing to the world, absolutely. Absolutely, it's capable of doing that to us and inflicting that kind of trauma. I think it's kind of an idiocy to think it's not. I think it's absolutely in the cards. But I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I'm a conspiracy realist. I'm not saying I know. Like a conspiracy theorist is like, oh, and it's also George Soros. Like I don't know if it's George Soros or not. I just know by the clues that seems to be that there's something happening behind the scenes. It would be foolish to assume not. So I don't know. I brought up 9/11 originally.
We started talking about consciousness.
That was on the other recording, which we shall not talk about. Okay. It's been gone. No, that'll have to be another conversation. It has been a while. It's been about 3 hours. Around 2.5, something like that.
Yeah, I got here. Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa. It's been good. Been a lot of setup. I think that the podcast setup, the actual physical thing, will probably get better. I'll try to edit it. I don't know how I'm going to publish this. I'll probably put it on a bunch of social medias. I'll probably host a website and host the actual files. That's the best way to go.
See, that's what I thought when you contacted me. I thought you were at that point and you wanted me to watch a podcast, not participate in a podcast.
Why would I? You have...
I thought you had it already set up.
There are plenty of cases of people with eyeballs, but there are very few people with your kind of mind, right? Particularly in the consciousness thing. Yeah, particularly in the consciousness department. What you said about... who was the physicist? Start with a W. Wheeler. I want to say Weller. I'll have to look that up. That was some very good stuff. We'll have to talk about that next time.
Unfortunately, I think he died. He was like 99 years old. So, and that was the last thing he was working on. Came up with some amazing stuff that has since been mostly verified.
At 99. You know, that makes me really sad to think, because we have lost a lot of late-aged scientists to COVID-19. We lost Benoit Mandelbrot. Yeah. We lost John Conway. John Conway is now dead. And they died in their 70s, roughly, I believe. And we could have had maybe a decade or two more of Mandelbrot and Conway, and who knows what they could have had. Because imagine if Wheeler lived to be 108. Mm-hmm. That's not marginally. That's not a huge increase. But if you can just consider, what if what if Maxwell solved all his equations? Where would we be then? Right. Yeah, COVID has been. In a lot of ways, we will never know exactly how much that particular virus has taken from us. We will know and feel exactly how many freedoms it takes from us because we experienced that. But we won't know how many other things could have been achieved had we handled that with more clarity and sanity. We're still going through it. I still believe there's yet more insanity surrounding.
Oh, definitely. I want to touch on one thing that you've mentioned. You mentioned it several times.
Sure.
In relationship to COVID. Loss of freedoms.
Yes.
When people don't act responsibly on their own, that's when freedoms are taken away.
Okay.
If people all wore seatbelts, there would not be any need for a law requiring seatbelts. If people didn't text and drive,
Right, there wouldn't be
because
any.
they acted in a mature, responsible manner.
Well,
And this goes back to the balance
what,
that we don't seem to have in our society. We're very lopsided in terms of individual freedom versus group responsibility. Other societies, for example, Chinese and Japanese, are very lopsided in the other direction.
right.
There needs to be a balance where we recognize,
Well,
as in New Zealand,
about
that or Taiwan, that this is an individual responsibility, but a responsibility
yes,
to avoid being subject to an imposition of a mandate.
principally, I agree with you almost in the entirety. There's just one example. Okay, so suppose I'm someone who wants your freedom. I will be able to choose edge cases, in which case, I can make an example of, and I can take your freedom if you're willing to give them up. And that's the case for anything. With COVID, we went out the gate on the supposition that the government was going to have to take care of us. On the outrage the government wasn't, right? That already throws the idea of this is my individual responsibility out the window. The government has to tell me to do stuff. And by the way, the government also has the instant strips that you dip on your tongue that can indicate with 99+% accuracy whether you are infectious with COVID-19 or not.
Right.
Cost fractions of a penny to make, and they can sell for dollars. There are only tens of millions of them produced a day. There needs to be billions, about 1 billion produced a day. They are not available. They are prescription only. They route through the FDA. The FDA will not approve you unless you have some kind of cloud-enabled app to where they can track where the disease is. They want that control. The appropriate response is to defenestrate the idea that the government is going to make it better. Say, look, you free people, you're able to manufacture your tests. Here are some guidelines on the science that we've been able to find. Figure it out yourself. And within a week, entrepreneurs would be able to manufacture millions of those tests. We would be able to have them like lollipops. People who are infectious will know if and when they're infectious and be able to make those moral decisions on what to do. And if our freedoms were respected on that, if there was no plan other than this is what we found scientifically, and we'll give you PSAs on what we know so far. That's the role of government. Other than that, these are our suggestions. We might make some grant money available for people who are trying to ramp up industry to make hand cleaner or whatever the heck to combat those things.
I do see a downside in that approach.
Okay.
Scammers.
Yes.
And I don't know, Brian, what the correct balance is between government and individual freedom.
So scammers.
Well, I do know, obviously, from what I wrote up in my personal brief.
Yes, I saw that.
However, there are situations that come up. And in my opinion, as a society, we flub this.
I would give us about a C. Look, let's talk about the benefits, okay? We have paid enormous costs, and let's talk about those enormous costs have gotten us. I'm just going off a gut feeling, maybe some projections. But I think it's fair to say that if we had done nothing, like it had tried to live exactly as we had been living, we probably would have experienced 100 million COVID cases in 2020.
Yeah.
We experienced about 15 million. We mitigated probably 3/4 of the deaths we would have seen in 2020. We scrambled towards a vaccine because that's the end. This only goes away with herd immunity. Well, not only. One of the more viable, pragmatic, practical paths to expect for it to go away is herd immunity. So a vaccine is a shortcut to that. We fast-tracked a vaccine. We shut down our economy. We bled our freedoms to get this, and we got 3/4 of the possible cases have been mitigated. 3/4 of the deaths corresponding have been mitigated. We probably would have had millions of people dead, single-digit millions, but millions dead within the first year had we done nothing, and we ended up with about 300 and 350,000. So it's not that we didn't have any yield. I would give us about a C. We did fair enough.
Okay.
Now, the only two drawbacks are we have overinvested and gotten too little out. We needed to mitigate more deaths than 3/4. We wanted to do that. And we paid way too much for what we got. We could have gotten a much better deal had we done better. Hindsight is 2020, literally, because, So,
I agree with that.
Yeah,
Assessment. Yeah.
I mean, my approach is just to give people freedom and do the individual freedom or the individual responsibility, right? Freedom and responsibility, like the idea that English has discrete words for this same thing is such a crime, because like as soon as you're free to do something, you are also responsible. So
Many people don't see that,
yeah,
unfortunately.
it's difficult, but that's how it goes. Okay, about you mentioned scammers. So one, scammers are a constant edge case, whether you have control factors, or not. So even if you have an FDA, scammers and quacks will get through. In fact, it might actually be easier if you have certain criteria, because once the quack is through, they're now legitimized.
Yes.
Right. So you can't. That's the edge case that's sold to make the asymmetry of like, here's the balance of power. Yes, in a free society, there will be scammers and products that don't work. And in a non-free society, there will be scammers and products that don't work that are now institutionalized. So in electronics, we don't have regulation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're absolutely right.
In electronics, we don't have regulation. It's a non-regulated industry for whatever reason. There's plenty of malware and crap software and crap hardware out there, but it's not what wins out, because we don't buy those things, because we'll make investments to avoid those things. That's an example of what freedom does and what freedom produces. It produces growth and flourishing. And if we had freedom in other aspects of our life, it wouldn't be that we just think of software and technology as the one thing that grows in the world. Everything else would be too. So in my heart of hearts, I advocate for freedom above everything else.
Yeah.
Now, I do know all of the other trash ideas of like the cases to mitigate freedom, the case to do like lockdowns and be draconian about things. I hate those ideas, actually. I know them, but I hate them.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Yeah. Well, what else is there? I think we need.
I go to work at 77 years old. I can't. I produced a book.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote articles. I did all kinds of stuff. But since March, it only took me a month and a half to do a book. No, the book was shorter than that. I did a book review in a month and a half. The book review was under 77 pages.
Wow.
After 9 months of that,
You can't just keep going.
you just can't keep going. So I'm working at Petrol, and I'm still working at the restaurant 1 day a week.
Right now what I'm doing is I went part-time at the job for paper mill service tech.
Yeah.
And other than that, I'm just kind of finding other projects. I had the project for wastewater COVID had ruined that. In fact, my partner went crazy. The guy handling the software gave me like the F the police, F the Republicans, and F you line, because he sees me as like a far right extremist. So I'm more of a centrist, but that guy's pretty far left. He's like gross about that.
I see you as more centrist.
Yeah, I would consider myself right of center. There are some things. So
especially after talking to you today, this is the longest we've ever talked.
Yes, it is. Yet it's still not long enough, of course. So I consider myself right of center because I consider libertarianism, free trade libertarianism, to be the absolute center. Culturally left, economically right. I don't see that unmitigated free trade in a pragmatic, practical, geopolitical world that we have it today is at least a sustainable thing, maybe not a good thing. I do believe that, this is a long conversation about America's posturing geopolitically. You're probably familiar with Bretton Woods, the Bretton Woods Agreement, and all these things. Well, we are in a fundamentally unsustainable state where we're not providing for our own needs. Our currency is backed up by our willingness to inflict violence on other states so that they trade oil on the US dollar. And the fact that all the other countries have to trade in the United States dollar means we can run our printing press for our own benefit at the rest of the world's cost. And that's what we're doing. And I don't believe that is, and by the way, all of those things arrived out of our drive and desire for a unified free trade, unilateral world, which we need to strive for. Globalism is important in many cases, but that does not, a compass will tell you where true north is. It will not tell you the efficient route of how to get there.
That's right.
A global society is where we should go long term, but we need to have a recess from that. The United States can't pick up the bill to provide for the common marketplace forever, for everyone all the time. We can't be the consumers of the world. We don't produce enough. We don't have our own house in order. It's by design. It's not by the fault of the common people. It's by design. We have to...
Words right out of my mouth. It is indeed
by
design.
Yes.
And it is not sustainable.
So what do we do? The best chance we actually had at correcting that was Donald Trump, and we just ousted him.
That I don't agree with.
Okay, explain.
I don't think he had the intelligence.
I agree.
I don't think he had the disposition. I don't think he had the cunning to be able to do that. Now, that doesn't mean I don't give him credit for other things. However, those things are not the kinds of things that appeal to me.
Those are true.
He did not get to be president by not having certain, shall I call them, manipulative skills.
Yes, he was
very fine-tuned.
Definitely a demagogue. Definitely talks in sound bites and probably thinks in sound bites too.
And
tweets. Writes in tweet length.
I am opposed, regardless of who it is, to put that kind of a burden on one person.
Right. So here's where I would counter that. The virtue of Donald Trump is that while he is not nuanced, he cannot fill in all the blanks himself as one man can't, especially him. No, he doesn't. Right. Of course he doesn't. But here's the thing, is that the people who can, the people who do not win. Donald Trump has one virtue. He wins. That's what he does. It's in his name. And his direction is correct. His direction is correct enough to where people who can fill in the blanks, who can translate this seemingly garbled stuff into policy. But he will fire those people.
But you hit the nail.
Exactly.
You're absolutely right, and I agree with you on everything.
Mm-hmm.
However, the baggage that comes with that is too great a price to pay, in my opinion.
I think that look, hey, I'm the kind of guy who works with literal garbage that I pull out of the dump. And I'm like, hey, this has good capacitors in it. So I will give anyone a pass, except Joe Biden. I believe that Joe Biden is completely, no, I'm just messing with you. I think that Joe Biden's actually a good guy. If Joe Biden had two buttons that says make America do well and make America do poorly, he's going to push the make America do well button.
Joe Biden was not my favorite candidate. In fact,
He should not be anyone's favorite candidate, unless you're Chinese. If you're the CCP, then he's a great candidate.
I mean, he's what we got. I hated Donald Trump.
I never hated him. I disliked certain things about him, but I never hated him.
I'll go with that.
Yeah.
That hate is too strong. Or
If I could,
he for 4 years he has consumed all of the energy of the country. He tweets every day. You cannot ignore the man.
yeah. In fact, when Twitter,
and he pulls the negative energy.
Yep.
Is attracted to him.
Sure.
And he is a genius at manipulating
That is his entire life. Everyone around him is an exploiter. Right.
You said that.
That
You're right.
he spins wheat into gold. Right. That's what he does. Those manipulative, evil people, he can manipulate them into doing what he wants. Now, his direction is correct. At least his rhetoric is. But like you said, the problem with Donald Trump is that he does not listen to advisors or anyone. He is not complacent enough to that. Perhaps his advisors are not manipulative enough to be able to couch these correct things.
Then what does that say about his ability to hire?
Right. But you can't hire what doesn't apply.
Or doesn't exist. He is a unique individual.
Yes. Maybe doesn't exist. I would hesitate to say that in a country of 300 and some odd million people, that you cannot find people who work extraordinarily well with Donald Trump and bring this country in the direction that he was trying to go in a good way.
You can't because of the baggage.
Maybe so.
And perhaps that's a good thing, perhaps that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
The baggage overrides the things that you were saying, which I'm not arguing with.
Right.
But that baggage, it's just too great a price to pay.
Yeah, and maybe that's a personality flaw of mine. I frequently pull things out of the dump. I frequently try to find stuff that I can turn into something good. And I've had difficulty finding success, So it's probably because I accept too much baggage. Maybe that's a personality flaw that I have with myself. Maybe so.
I can't answer that.
Neither can I right now. But it's good to consider.
Because in so doing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm holding up a mirror to myself.
Don't we all do that?
Yeah, we all do. We all do. So
Yeah.
very reluctant to find fault without looking deeply at myself. At the same time, that doesn't mean that I give a pass to everything. If somebody is a scoundrel
Mm-hmm.
and he's robbing you blind, oh, isn't he wonderful? He's a good father.
Yeah, he's a good father, right?
He feeds his wife. And,
Right.
He's a good father.
Yeah,
But he's stealing my money.
right.
I mean, okay, he has a good characteristic.
Yeah.
But I'm out $500.
You're absolutely correct. I do believe that Donald Trump has aspects of him that conform with con artist, for sure.
And Mary Trump used those exact words.
Right.
And she's
the expert on Trump.
She is, not only does she have the inside on the family, she
Mhm.
is a member of that family. She was raised in that family. She knows those family members intimately,
Mhm.
those deceased and those still alive. And she has the academic and professional credentials.
Yes, you can't. You
And
can't
now
argue with
I
that.
just read, it may have been just this morning, she is suing him for allegedly being cheated out of her inheritance.
I don't doubt it. Look, there's a lot. You're right. There's a lot of baggage with him. I do believe that the direction that he goes in is right. It may only be right incidentally. It may because
He can't keep to it.
no, he can't keep to it. He really can't.
The
Whatever
reason
has
why he can't keep
Yeah.
to it is because it's baggage. You were right. You're giving me that advice. You're the best vice president. You said you're the best vice president
Yeah.
I've ever had. You're going to deliver to me those Senate votes to overturn the Electoral College. And tomorrow, when he's lost, Mike Pence is the biggest piece of
Crap.
SHIT crap that
Yeah.
I've ever seen. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't operate in that kind of a topsy-turvy world. If
No.
you have a direction and you have an idea,
And the other thing
it's
is that
a sound idea.
he does oust people who don't immediately go in lockstep, which means that like he gets a feedback loop. Whatever flaws or non-nuances he has, he's not going to correct himself.
And who wrote the book Anonymous? Somebody who's an insider.
Right.
I mean, he has the superficial loyalty.
Okay, but I don't think that it's fair to say that all of us jumped into bed with a devil we don't know.
That is true.
I
knew him from New York.
Oh, that's true. But I'm talking about the ousting of Donald Trump. We just we provided 4 years for the deep state portion of the left, the kind of people on the left that cheat Bernie Sanders out of his nomination. We allowed 4 years for those people to organize, and boy, howdy, have they organized. Look, when the elections were happening on Facebook, Twitter, and Google, and all these places, if you raised an eyebrow at those election results, and there are plenty things to raise an eyebrow about, and plenty evidence, no proof, because that requires a process which has been denied every time. So if you raised an eyebrow about that or posted about that, very accurately would Facebook's algorithm block you. That is not the product of an alpha run of a product. They know how to do this. This has happened before.
Absolutely.
This is rehearsed. This is organized. It cannot be otherwise. So I don't believe we had an election, incidentally, of course, but what really happened was a power struggle. I really do, honestly, it's not a belief thing. It's just I recognize it to be a power struggle. And perhaps all elections are power struggles. All election cycles in the United States are power struggles. And between a bull in the china shop, Donald Trump, who's directionally right incidentally some of the time, and a raving lunatic who sucks all the energy out of the room the rest of the days, and the organized, distilled consolidation of power enabled by technology the world has not seen yet, I'm going to pick the lunatic. I would vastly prefer the lunatic, because that's the last chance you have. As dismal as it is the last chance you have to preserve your liberty. Right. And
I would not pick the lunatic. That doesn't mean that there's not a viable choice. And you had mentioned this, 335 million people. There must be a viable choice.
They do not win. They do not have the quality to win.
Darn it, I thought the same thing.
Right. The good people do not win. Donald Trump
There must be somebody who's clever enough.
Donald Trump is as good as you possibly can, which is not very good at all, while still being able to very much win. Like, that's how juxtaposed those things are. He was ousted largely for being his own man. You cannot control. No one tells Donald Trump what to do. Donald Trump doesn't tell Donald Trump what to do because he changes his mind. No one does that. That's why he's ousted. That's the biggest reason why he's ousted, because you cannot rein him in. And who's put in? This corpse of a guy who's practically still dead. He might actually be dead, and actually there might be a marionette player around. Look, Joe...
I don't expect him to survive. I expect Kamala Harris to become president.
And that's what scares the hell out of me. Because Kamala Harris, if you look at who that person is, maybe Stalin seems comparable. I'm not trying to exaggerate. She's wicked smart. She's
wicked smart.
Wicked smart. She was also a prosecution attorney who was sadistic for decades before getting power. Stalin entered power being an idealist. His job was to dole out the jobs within the USSR. He was an administrator for years, entered as an idealist. And over decades, once he got into power, over decades of power, he became progressively more jaded, progressively more paranoid. Kamala Harris is every bit as smart as Joseph Stalin. And Joseph Stalin had an IQ of about 155. She's every bit as smart, and she's entering power already steeped in institutional evil. If your job is to put people, innocent or not, in prison, that's evil. It is an evil aspect of our democracy. You know when you're supposed to lose and when not to. That's terrible. That's what scares the hell out of me about that. And it has an intersectional face on it. So if you try to criticize evil, you are a racist. So it's very, very difficult to organize with any credibility against that.
I'm not fearful of having labels put on me if I'm telling the truth.
Yes.
Now, that said and done, there are ways to do it as well. If one uses racist language, then you deserve the label. If one can make a case without using racist thinking or racist terminology, and it's based upon factual evidence, regardless of what label is put on you, you've done a good job.
Race is such... it's like it's ingrained in any kind of society.
Whenever somebody puts a label on you, that is a way of demeaning you.
Right, it's an othering thing.
If the person does not understand.
Yeah, especially.
Right. If somebody says,
I get
don't
called.
Vote for her. She's a bitch.
Yeah. Well,
that, and I'm not saying Kamala Harris.
Right.
That label.
No, that's far too light of a word to apply to. We need to invent new profanity for.
Right. That label sticks, whether it's true or not.
Right. That's true.
My brother, who does not have, I could lose 40 points in my IQ and be smarter than me.
Oh my.
We have two different fathers.
Oh, that's why.
And I heard him repeating sound bites that he didn't even know the meaning of. And that's that same kind. You put it out there, Hitler got it right, Himmler got it right. Repeat it often enough.
You repeat a lie often. People think it's the truth.
I stopped arguing with him because...
There's no point.
There's no point.
Right, because the opposition at that point is reinforcing the identity.
We just had an argument, and I haven't spoken to him. I've spoken to him once in about 2 months. He just called me today. It was over beta blockers for enlarged prostate. And they don't use beta blockers for enlarged prostate.
Tell him to read the literature. He might be onto something.
He read something.
Oh.
And I went online and checked my knowledge because...
Right, because you're responsible and you do your research.
And I wasn't even arguing, just show me.
Mm-hmm.
And he just...
Went off.
Went off.
Right. So we saw that with hydroxychloroquine. Like when people were like, hydroxychloroquine's a miracle drug. Look, it might actually have some uses as a prophylactic, but like, is it reasonable to suspect that right now, as this new disease emerges, that this particular drug that we have is the ideal therapeutic? It might be the best that we have available to us at some time. But of course, therapeutics are going to evolve, and we're going to ban that. There are people who still use hydroxychloroquine today. There may be some benefits to it, but largely they're doing it because it was popularized as opposition, as alternative medicine.
People believe, and I just had an argument online with somebody.
Yeah.
It was on Ancient Origins website it was about male circumcision. And I made a statement, this is widely practiced in the ancient Near East.
Yeah.
In ancient, male circumcision in ancient Egypt. They've looked at the mummies, for goodness sakes.
Right.
And somebody said, educate us. And I gave links.
Right.
You know, go to these websites. What's wrong with you people?
Oh, if you're arguing with people online.
Where we have access to nearly the sum total of human knowledge online. Go look. What do you mean, me educate you?
The contact area of your comments online selects for Dunning-Kruger events, right? So people who are confident enough to comment and argue with you, but yet not able.
Nobody has to guess.
I get this way with environmentalists,
Uh-huh.
and I probably the next guest I'll have on is Holly Sellers. You need to meet her. She's like a female Stephen Irwin here in the PD. She's wonderful. She's a animal rehabilitator. Beautiful work. I brought her turtles.
Okay.
So turtles that were wounded, and she'll heal them back to full health and release them back in the wild. Just great stuff. But I get into arguments with environmentalists. I am mostly ignorant about the way Earth works as a system. Mostly ignorant. There are people who are head and shoulders above me, who are much more knowledgeable in their field. And yet, the Greta Thunbergs of the world do not know the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's like 409, 415, somewhere around there, parts per million. They don't know how we monitor CO2. They don't know the interaction. They don't know what accounts for warming on the planet. The greenhouse gas, the biggest greenhouse gas by a very wide margin, like 2/3, is water vapor. Right. They don't know these things. They don't have a composition of the actual state of the world, of the Earth as a planetary system, and what we're doing to it, and how it actually works, what strategies we should take and what strategies we shouldn't. What they have and what they've digested and internalized is a new and budding religion. Religions make their debuts on the backs of dying empires all the time, every time. Yes, the Persians birthed the Islamism.
No. Saudis birthed Islam.
Sorry, yes, Saudis did, but isn't that the dying end?
Zoroastrianism.
Okay, sorry, Zoroastrian, and that's actually mentioned in the Quran. The first page of the Quran says, "Hey, Zoroastrians, the Christians, and the Jews, they're all okay. They worship Abraham just like we do." Christians on the back of the Roman Empire, and Judaism probably on the back of Egypt. Possibly, we don't really remember that far back as a civilization. So Akhenaten?
Nefertiti was his wife.
Okay.
He was the first monotheist that's recorded
In Egypt.
in Egypt. He was Pharaoh of Egypt.
Now, Nefertiti, that was like ancient Egypt, like pyramid builder Egypt.
Pyramid builder.
Okay, that's
1500, 2000 BCE.
Okay, I thought the pyramids were built like 4,000 BCE, like Khufu and further back.
The first was Joseph.
Josher?
Joseph,
Huh?
I think it is. And it does go back that far. Pyramid building was a continuous exercise.
An aside about pyramids. So I don't know what's written about Egyptology and the history of it. I'm very ignorant on that. However, the construction of things I can understand. And the critique to the people who explain these things, I can also level pretty good critiques. Why is it that Egyptologists try to, they automatically assume that whatever they find around the build site of pyramids must be what we used to construct the pyramids. Mm-hmm. These dolomite pounders, that's what they used. They hewed out these enormous blocks. If Egyptologists saw American skyscrapers, would they presume that we used Gatorade bottles and cigarette butts to construct our skyscrapers?
Definitely the bottles.
Definitely the bottles, right. Clearly these were chisels.
Yes, they would, because we base our assumptions upon ancient civilizations.
Right.
We base it on current knowledge.
Yes. Well, yes. They must have had the bottles that they used as hammers with these.
Dry, so
Oh, I left you some water.
this will help my throat.
Oh, okay. They must have used the bottles as hammers to use these chisels that look, and as the chisel wore down, they threw away the handle. And we knew they used so many of these chisels, they bought them in packs of 24 named Marlboro. Yeah, that's how they made that's how they would do that. The pyramids, it seems intuitive to me that the pyramids in really any megalithic structure they are not going to be constructed any differently from how we make megalithic structures today, meaning that they are concrete, they're polymers. It seems to me that the blocks of the pyramid are probably molded cast blocks, progressively cast through polymer, and was probably built from the ground up. I can prove it to anyone. In any case of casting in concrete, there will always be artifacts.
They were built of stones. They weren't built of concrete.
Are we sure?
Absolutely.
How?
They exist. We can go look at them.
If I find one artifact of some wood or a tool or something in one of those blocks, that disproves that.
No.
No?
No, it doesn't look that way.
Okay. So how would
If you look, there are 10 pyramids. So say the Great Pyramids
At Giza.
of Giza,
Mm-hmm.
Cheops, and then the rest of them. You go and you look at them, and they're built of stone.
Yeah.
Sandstone or limestone or
But
what have you, or granite.
R-
And then you go to another one, and you find exactly what you're saying.
mm-hmm.
That doesn't destroy all of the other evidence. It just enhances it. So, in which case,
I'm pretty sold on this thing because look, the sandstone and those are all composite rocks, and that's what.
but they're natural made, they're not man-made.
Okay, and we know this because we've done chemical analysis on them, or
They're there, of course we can.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
I don't see a way. Okay, so we would actually hew blocks out of quarry, and they're multi-tons, and then they would somehow transport them to the site to then assemble them with extreme accuracy.
Now,
I find that almost logistically impossible.
now,
Yeah.
that said and done, the exact means by which they are built, not known.
It seems to me that they're cast. I can't imagine that logistically.
But
Yeah.
there are wall paintings of them building.
Yeah,
the pyramids.
building it with blocks. Moving blocks to build them.
Moving blocks.
I'd have to see that. Look at there's another thing. This is
Egyptians painted everything.
mhm.
So
Well, they thought that the sides of the pyramids, when they had limestone on them, were coated in hieroglyphs.
that I don't know. I thought they were plain, but they may have
Some
been.
people I've
They
heard
may
that.
have been because they wrote
How would we
on
know?
everything. They wrote on columns. They wrote. Good point. How would we know?
Yeah.
Because the facing has been removed
And used to build Cairo.
and used to build other things, right? And over the passage of time, it wore away anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That's desert,
There's another.
flowing sand.
There's another
very,
thing.
very soon.
There's another thing that fits with the the casting thing that I think really does fit. And I still have to disagree. I just can't imagine the blocks. I don't know the history. Like I said, I might
That's
be an
why
idiot.
Wikipedia and the internet is there.
It could.
Go out and take a look.
I'll have to take the research, but
And
yeah. Well, here's another
I
thing.
wasn't there.
You're right. Neither was I. But I'll tell you that if I had to build a pyramid today, I would not be quarrying blocks and moving them. I would be casting them with probably concrete. In the United States is Portland cement.
Yeah,
It might
I
use something else.
don't believe concrete existed at that time. I believe it was a Roman invention.
I can tell you. Okay, so Machu Picchu. This is a different build site, different time era, everything. Peru, right. Look at the blocks of Machu Picchu. They fit together perfectly. They're complex geometries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to draw your attention to this pillow feature. See this fold?
Yes.
These little. It's a problem with wrapping a Euclidean geometry around a non-Euclidean space. These always happen. Every pillow has those little nubs.
Right.
They have them on the blocks at Machu Picchu.
Yes.
Machu Picchu's blocks were bags of concrete, bags of cement, and they were had water poured on them. They were bags because it's above the tree line. They can't get timber to make the progressive cast they did with the pyramids. They have to be bags. I can be proven right. You pry up one of these things, I guarantee you're going to find bag material, lama fur, I don't care what it is, you're going to find it in there.
I don't know enough about the building of
Right.
Machu Picchu to say one thing only of the others.
But maybe this is just me looking at it. I could be wildly wrong. I just can't imagine. I can imagine it not reconciling with what's written or what's recorded or what's historically remembered. I can absolutely
But they
get
can
that.
go there and do a chemical analysis.
Sure, but
And-
we're not going to find. Okay, so nature makes those blocks, the sandstone blocks, as a composite stone, and it happens because the stone gets wet and it gets salty, and the pitch is actually calcium. That's what the
Right.
pitch is made out of. It's
Right.
it's actually limestone that you mine and then you bake the water out of it, and then it's pitch. If water can be pumped, the aggregate is on site and the pitch is very light to move. So if you were going to move millions of tons of rock, that would be the way to do it. Logistically, I just don't see any other way to do it. There may be other methods, like, and they may be doing things that we're not exactly, they're probably exactly doing things that we're not familiar with. Who knows?
Check the internet, see how they were built.
Maybe so. Like, I'd have to.
I have to because
Right.
I don't know.
We weren't there, right? But I guess okay. So in a practical sense, and I hate to like harp on it because you're right. You know the history a lot better than I do. Like I said, I haven't learned Egyptology history. I just have a sense of how I would do things, and I think looking at some of the geometries that you see in the pyramids, the linear shafts, those are incredibly difficult
Right.
to carve, even from sandstone. They are not hard at all to cast around if you have a mold in between their blocks. Not hard at all. The slope of the pyramid, the angle of the pyramid, you have to have you would start at a base. So the base of the pyramid is a particular way. It's progressive because you can't. They didn't have the ability to do slit mold casting, which we have today, so we can cast vertically.
Right.
But they don't have that. So
Right.
that gives an aspect ratio that you see on all of these megalithic structures. I do believe they're cast. Even in European monasteries and cathedrals, I believe that these were cast. And the reason why is because you can look at them and you can see imprints of linen cloth. And I guarantee you that nature did not have linen cloth imprinting on composite rocks. And I can find you in the pyramid. I guarantee you there's going to be things in the pyramid where there are artifacts, tools, things that they had in the casting process, which were dropped in those stones and that you can find. And if I can find one piece of wood that's stuck somewhere or a tool or anything, then it has to necessarily be cast. It might be that we don't recognize the exact chemistry as concrete as we know it, but it seems to me that would be the most practical way to do it. They may have moved certain blocks, particularly the facing. Maybe not even the facing. That would be easier to cast than it would be to move. But I from a practical sense, that's how. If I were to build a big giant triangle out in the middle of the desert, that's how I would do it. with sand that was there.
As smart as you, or didn't have the technological.
I believe they were very smart. I
Yeah,
believe
they were very smart. They really were.
I believe they did not use dolomite pounders to carve away stones. Look, I mean, look at Egyptian hieroglyphs and the Egyptian paintings. You have a lot of things that have positive geometry on them. That's much easier to cast than it is to carve away. Not saying that's impossible to carve away. Of course, people do marble carvings, but it's very easy to cast. So,
They weren't cast.
Okay. Oh, dang.
The walls
Mm-hmm.
were covered with plaster. They worked in plaster. They
Yeah.
worked in malleable substances. Some were carved,
Okay.
but some were written on papyrus. I mean, that's,
Even there could also be, well, I guess that makes sense because you can't cast granite, and there are certainly granite blocks up there. So unless there's some way you can cast granite that we don't know about today, then at least those had to be blocks because granite's composite too, so it's not igneous. Yeah. No, I don't think there's a way to cast granite. So that's what I think about the pyramids. Now, I could be. I know I'm against the literature and the established science there, but if I find artifacts, that's really like an artifact in a block.
the chances of finding artifacts are extremely good because
Yeah.
of the climate.
Okay.
Wood is preserved. You look at Tutankhamun's tomb.
But tools would be found
Tools, if they were,
inside of blocks.
why not?
It takes.
It's a very dry, very arid climate. Things are preserved that would not normally be preserved, say, in Europe.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe.
So if they use wooden tools, chances are very, very high that if they left them inside,
Mm-hmm.
they would still be there.
But they'd have to be covered with sand, and the sand would eventually, over
Not
geological
if they
time.
were inside, if they were in a chamber, if they were left in a chamber.
Oh, I'm talking about like the block, and then the thing is suspended in the block, like someone dropped it as it was being
They would
cast.
still be there.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody didn't, if the natural forces didn't throw it away. If
Hmm.
it were covered, chances are very great that it will be there. If it's exposed to the elements, don't forget,
Mm-hmm.
sandstorms are very common.
And that'll scratch away stuff.
Scratch away stuff, it'll destroy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the climate itself, if they're protected in any way, shape, or form, they're going to be there.
Yeah, I would say so.
You look at Tutankhamun's his throne.
Mm-hmm.
It's wood. It's painted wood.
I haven't
It's
looked at
in
Tutankhamun's.
absolutely pristine condition,
Oh yeah, just because of the climate, huh?
just because of the climate.
Okay, so
Linen, clothes that they wore,
still there.
considered. The mummy wrappings, so you know yourself.
Also, they had cocaine in some of those mummies. That's a Colombian thing. They had to be in contact with South America. That's where that plant's from. They had New World stuff.
No, but I don't rule it out.
Right.
Because we're constantly finding things that aren't supposed to be where they are. Roman coins that are found in Georgia
Yeah.
that were put there by colonists.
Yeah. Well, the Romans were everywhere. Vikings were too. Annoyingly everywhere.
The Vikings were everywhere.
Yeah. Where were we going before Egypt?
Oh, we were talking about politics before then. We started out with consciousness.
Yes. Good smattering of topics. It is now the afternoon. It's been a whole, almost 4 hours, probably 3. I hope the darn computer isn't going to destroy itself. Even if we didn't capture a single darn second, it's absolutely worth it just for the company of the conversation.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'll have to do this again soon, sometime. Or maybe not so soon. Who knows when the frequency will be.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You don't need to be